We interrupt this program for a live event.
United Republic of Tanzania, representing Her Excellency Dr. Mrs. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania. His Excellency Mr. Ndaba Nkosinati Haolote, Vice President of the Republic of Botswana and Minister of Finance of Botswana and Governor for the African Development Bank. His Excellency Mr. Lamin Zain Ali Mahaman, Prime Minister and Minister of Economy and Finance of the Republic of Niger and Governor for the African Development Bank. Your Excellency Mr. Joachim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique. Honorable Mrs. Nyale Kaba, Minister of Economy, Planning and Development of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire and Chairperson of the Board of Governors. Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group. Honorable Governors of the African Development Bank Group, alternate governors of the African Development Bank Group, heads of institutions, and other senior officials of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, heads of regional economic communities and financial institutions, members of the diplomatic corps, executive directors of the African Development Bank Group, senior management and staff of the bank group, media houses, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start, may we please give a round of applause to the group that just performed this wonderful dance. That was the Akwaba Journey to the Hearts of the Riches of Cote d'Ivoire. The group is the National Ballet of Cote d'Ivoire under the direction of renowned choreographer Georges Mamboye. Their performance invites you on a marvelous journey to the heart of traditional riches and new dynamic and creative and luminous culture full of hope, like Akwaba. Akwaba, a unique artistic experience that highlights the beauty and riches of Cote d'Ivoire, a true burst of color and rhythm. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Vincent Mehele, Secretary General of the African Development Bank Group, and I will be facilitating the opening ceremony. It is my singular honor to welcome you to the 2025 annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank and the African Development Fund in this beautiful city of Abidjan, also known and fondly called Pearl de Lagoon, Pearl of Lagoons, Cote d'Ivoire. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on this auspicious occasion of the annual meetings, our shareholders meet once again to take stock of the bank's group's activities and performance and make decisions that chart the way for the bank group. I'd like to express our profound gratitude to you all for kindly and favorably responding to our invitation. There's a lot in store for everyone during this week, as you will notice from the lineup of knowledge events, numerous side events, and hospitality events. Indeed, Cote d'Ivoire, our host and headquarters country, has prepared a lot of activities for you, our esteemed guests, as displayed from the colorful and wonderful cultural performance, and of course, the reception last night. Ladies and gentlemen, before we delve into the heart of the event, allow me to convey our deepest and sincere appreciation to the Honorable Ms. Nyale Kaba, Minister of Economy, Planning and Development, Afbd Governor, and Chairperson of the Boards of Governors for her sterling work Madam, not yet. For her sterling, for her sterling work and dedication during her tenure at the helm of the bank group's highest decision-making body, and for ensuring that Cote d'Ivoire, as host, held nothing back in ensuring that we had a very successful annual meetings. Honorable Governor, we thank you and appreciate your relentless efforts and great support. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this year's annual meeting, Making Africa's Capital Work Better for Africa's Development, speaks volumes. It is therefore our hope that the deliberations will provide answers to the difficult questions embedded in the theme. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, I'd like to present the program of the opening ceremony. We will have a video, which is the opening video, and then we'll have a welcome message from the chairperson of the Board of Governors, Madam Nyale Kaba. And then we will hear a video tribute from Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, to be followed by the keynote speech of Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the Bank, after which we will play the host country video, and then the opening remarks of His Excellency, the President. I'd like to introduce the 2025 annual meetings video. Please play the video.
Le groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, votre banque, change la vie quotidienne de millions d'Africains. Innovant, résistant et avec de l'impact. Les 10 dernières années ont été marquées par des actions audacieuses et des transformations remarquables, visant à bâtir une Afrique encore plus forte, en tirant parti de ses immenses ressources et de son potentiel. Des terres agricoles fertiles et de riches gisements miniers, un peuple travailleur et résilient, nos vastes ressources naturelles, une énergie propre et abondante.
The continent of Africa is endowed with a lot of resources. First of all, we are getting enough sun than any other continent, I think. We have water, very big rivers. We have waterfalls that we could be able to put hydropowers, but we have also geothermal. If they're used properly, they could power the whole continent.
Les jeunes Africains dynamiques, diplômés et créatifs sont les architectes qui construisent et façonnent l'avenir de notre continent.
In an aging world, Africa's growing young population offers the workforce and markets of tomorrow.
Nos outils financiers et nos ressources en investissement fondent notre croissance. Nos réseaux d'échange, nos coopérations régionales, notre soft power connectent l'Afrique à elle-même et la connectent au monde.
There are wonderful opportunities in Africa, but we're going to have to do a lot more and a lot more together to realize the promise of bringing the kinds of private sector funds that Africa deserves.
Trop souvent, le capital de l'Afrique travaille davantage pour les autres que pour l'Afrique. Mais nous pouvons faire la différence et changer l'histoire. La réponse est ici, chez nous, en nous. Elle est dans nos sols, dans nos forêts, dans nos banques, au cœur de notre population.
It is we who shall forge the manner in which we cooperate, integrate, and invest, rather than simply being victims of a past history.
And we will keep pressing together for an international financial architecture that is no longer outdated, dysfunctional, and unfair.
Cela signifie réformer nos institutions, mobiliser davantage nos ressources domestiques et instaurer la confiance dans nos systèmes financiers.
Africa must chart its future, relying not on benevolence of others, but on its own self-determination of self-reliance, building reliable alliances, leveraging opportunities in this global dynamics while putting Africa first. Only then will Africa be great again. And let's make that happen.
Bienvenue aux Assemblées annuelles 2025 du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement. Ensemble, faisons en sorte que le capital de l'Afrique travaille mieux, plus intelligemment et favorise le développement de l'Afrique.
Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is now my honor to call upon Honorable Mrs. Nyale Kaba, Minister of Economy, Planning and Development, Governor of the African Development Bank for the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, and Chairperson of the Boards of Governors, to deliver her welcome statement. Madam.
I'm pleased to join all of you as the African Development Bank gathers to honor our President.
Excellent.
Your Excellency, Mr. Alassane Ouattara, President of the Republic of Cote d'Ivoire, Your Excellency, Mr. Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros, Your Excellency, Mr. John Dramani Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana, Your Excellency, Dr. Philip Isidore Mpango, Vice President, representing Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Your Excellency, Mr. Ndaba Haulate, Vice President and Minister of the Economy and Finance of Botswana, Your Excellency, Mr. Ali Alamin Zain, Prime Minister and Minister of the Economy and Finance of the Republic of Niger, Your Excellency, Mr. Joachim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, Mr. Prime Minister, Head of Government of Cote d'Ivoire, distinguished heads of institutions of Cote d'Ivoire, Honorable Governors of the Africa Development Bank Group, the President of the Africa Development Bank Group, Honorable Members of Government of Cote d'Ivoire, distinguished representatives of international organizations, Your Excellencies, ambassadors and distinguished representatives of the diplomatic corps, members of senior management of the African Development Bank, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen of the media, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is with immense delight and profound joy that I take the floor to welcome you to Abidjan, to the 2025 edition of the annual meetings of the Africa Development Bank Group. Akwaba, welcome, bienvenue. Pending the same message from a more authorized voice, Cote d'Ivoire is particularly honored and proud to once again play host to this groundbreaking event here in the host country of the headquarters of the bank. This testifies to the utmost trust, fraternity, and attachment to our home. And in this respect, let me convey my deep-seated gratitude to the President of the Republic, Mr. Alassane Ouattara, whose unstinting support has made it possible to provide support, efficient support to every step of the preparation of this ceremony. Mr. President, sir, thank you for this commitment at the service of Africa. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, these annual meetings are taking place against a global backdrop which is characterized by a myriad of disruptions and uncertainties, and as such, Africa has no other choice than to get together around its strongest institutions. The African Development Bank, by its Pan-African vision and commitment towards the structural transformation of the continent, positions itself at the very heart of these dynamics. And the theme for this year, which is to make Africa's capital work better for Africa's development, reminds us that Africa is replete with natural and cultural capital and exceptional demographic potential, which should very quickly transform into shared prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's edition is of particular importance because it will also see the election of a new president at the helm of this institution. And in this respect, allow me to commend the leadership of Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, outgoing president, who over the past decade has really provided the much needed boost, remarkably so, to the bank by a number of transformational initiatives and by the resolute defense of Africa's interests in the international stage. Thank you. Thank you, President Adesina, for your exceptional commitment to be at the service of the continent of Africa. My thanks also to all bank staff for the work done. Allow me also to congratulate and warmly thank the organizing committee for the commitment, professionalism, and availability which have contributed a great deal to the smooth conduct of this edition. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the annual meetings of the bank are not only an institutional framework, but also the ideal moment for us to chart the future of our continent. And in my capacity as chair of the board of governors this year, I will invite each and every one of us to enhance our collective dialogue on Africa's priorities, to consolidate strategic partnerships between our countries and the bank, and to build an ambitious vision which hinges on excellence, innovation, and integration. And to conclude, allow me to reiterate our utmost recognition and acknowledgement to His Excellency President Alassane Ouattara, to all heads of state and government, as well as all the senior personalities present in this room for their presence, which gives another importance to this ceremony. And I thank you for your kind attention.
Please put your hands together for the chairperson for such an insightful welcome remarks. From the words of the chairperson, I would like to transition to the video message from Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General.
Excellencies, I'm pleased to join all of you as the African Development Bank gathers to honor your president, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. Dear Dr. Adesina Akin, your vision and dedication to just and sustainable development have changed countless lives across Africa. You set a bold course to help shape the continent for the better through your High Fives agenda, powering, feeding, industrializing, integrating Africa, and improving the quality of life. As president of the African Development Bank, you tripled the bank's capital base, led responses to urgent crises, including COVID-19, while advancing long-term solutions from clean energy to climate-resilient agriculture. And your leadership on special drawing rights has opened new avenues in financing for development. This is essential to support countries facing crushing debt, climate shocks, and limited fiscal space. Your advocacy was instrumental in securing their rechanneling through multilateral development banks, helping direct and use global resources where they are most needed. The United Nations thanks you and looks forward to building on your remarkable record in the years ahead. Once again, Akin, thank you for all you have done to advance inclusive development, full progress on the Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union's Agenda 2063, and build a more fair and just financial system for all. I'm pleased to join all of you as the
Thank you. From that message from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the President of the African Development Bank Group and the Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Bank Group, Dr. Akiwumi A. Adesina, to deliver his keynote speech.
And gathers to honor your president.
Your Excellency, Mr. Alassane Ouattara, President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Your Excellency, Mr. Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros, Your Excellency, John Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana, Your Excellency, Dr. Philip Isdor Banko, Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, representing Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Your Excellency Mr. Ndaba Kusinati Golwate, Vice President of the Republic of Botswana, Your Excellency Mr. Robert Brick Mambe, Prime Minister of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Your Excellency Ali Mahaman Lamine Zain, Prime Minister of the Republic of Niger, Excellency Joachim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and heads of diplomatic missions, as well as international organizations, the President of the Senate of Côte d'Ivoire, Mr. Adama Bitogo, President of the National Assembly of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, my dear friend and sister, whom I call the quiet giant, Minister Nyale Kaba, Minister of the Economy and Planning, she is really silent, quiet, and Development of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, President of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished ministers and senior officials of Côte d'Ivoire, the executive directors of the African Development Bank Group, the senior management and staff of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I cannot be here today without my beautiful and gracious Grace. What would I do without Grace? Welcome to the 2025 annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. I would like to thank His Excellency Mr. Alassane Ouattara, my dear big brother and host, for being in our midst here today. I would also like to thank all the heads of state and government, as well as their representatives, who have honored us by their presence. I am deeply grateful, Your Excellencies, for having found the time to be here today and for the unwavering trust and personal support that you have lent to me over the last 10 years at the helm of the African Development Bank Group. And I'm so thankful. This would be my last annual meeting in my capacity as President of the African Development Bank Group. It is a time of reflection to take stock over the 10 years of my tenure. Is also an opportunity to publicly deliver an account for the mandate that you collectively entrusted me.
So I have so much joy today. I have so much to say today. So please excuse me, as I will take a little bit of time. But you can be sure that I will not be here next year speaking as the president of the bank. So you can take and deduct all my time for next year from now. Thank you. I'm sure they are counting the time for next year as well. I wish to start by saying thank you. Thank you for electing me as president of the African Development Bank on May 28, 2015, right here in Abidjan in this same hall. And Mr. Mambre, who was there at that time, was the minister right here and is here with us today. Thank you for re-electing me in 2020 to a second five-year term with a historic 100% votes of all the 81 regional and non-regional shareholders, the first ever such in the history of the African Development Bank. Thank you very much. As I have always said, being president of the African Development Bank for me is not a job, it is a mission. Nothing can be greater than to have been given the responsibility, the resources, the mandate, the support, and the platform to help transform Africa, the continent of my own birth. Thanks to you, African heads of state and government, for your incredible support. I made it the hallmark of my presidency with my staff to carefully listen to and for us to understand the needs of your countries and to do all possible within the available resources of the bank to support your economic and development ambitions. Thank you to the people of Africa who daily are our focus. As I say to my staff, the most important part of the African Development Bank is the development part. We must fast-track Africa's development. I am proud that over the past 10 years, collectively, working together, the African Development Bank has been an accelerator of Africa's development. The high fives of the bank to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life of the people of Africa have been transformational for Africa. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the past decade, the work of the African Development Bank has impacted the lives of 565 million people. This includes 28 million people with access to electricity, 104 million people with food security, 121 million people with access to improved transport, 128 million people with access to improved health services, 67 million people with improved access to information and communications technology, 63 million people with access to drinking water, and 34 million people with access to sanitation. The bank accelerated regional integration with massive support for infrastructure to support the African Continental Free Trade Area. Over the past 10-year period, under my presidency of the African Development Bank, we would have provided, Your Excellencies, a total of $102 billion in support of Africa. This represents 46% of all the financing of the bank since its establishment in 1964. The African Development Bank financed over $55 billion in support of infrastructure, from roads to rails to airports to seaports to digital and communications, health, water, and sanitation.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and right here in our host country, financing of most of the major urban infrastructure visible in Abidjan, according to the vision of the President, was strongly supported by the African Development Bank Group. Your Excellency, President Alassane Ouattara, I am delighted to announce that Under my presidency, and with the tireless work of our bank, the financial support of the African Development Bank to Cote d'Ivoire increased by 500% in 10 years. To give you a ballpark, between 1964 through 2014, cumulative approvals for Cote d'Ivoire totaled 2.3 billion euros. But since 2015, the bank has committed, within a mere 10 years, $3.6 billion, additional euros actually, which is actually 1.6 times higher than all approvals over the last 50 years. My dear friend, President Alassane Ouattara is a globally famed economist. And you know, if I do not do that, he's going to perform all the economic analysis of the work I would have done. And this also includes the famed Henri Conan Bédier Bridge, and it also includes, Mr. President, your project, the Abidjan Urban Transport Project, and the iconic bridge, which is 1,400 meters long, linking Yopougon to Adjamé, as well as 88 kilometers of urban highway and 89 refurbished junctions. This also includes all the beautiful roads, Mr. President, leading to the new Alassane Ouattara Stadium, where Cote d'Ivoire won. The 2023 AFCON, I was there, right there at the stadium with the president, and on that day,
bleu et avec lunettes.
I didn't wear the Ivorian colors. I was in blue. Just in case a goal was scored, I would focus on my glasses. And the president was very kind to invite me as he handed the cup. Your Excellency, Mr. Alassane Ouattara, beyond AFCON, I hope that as the bank, we have also scored a goal for Cote d'Ivoire. Thank you indeed, Mr. President.
Regardez le bleu là-bas, c'était bleu.
You can see the blue right there. It was blue. I was indeed in blue.
Excellencies, other projects pertaining to countries of the heads of state here present today. While several can be listed for each country, time does not allow. Nonetheless, the impact of the African Development Bank Group is tangibly felt all across Africa. In Tanzania, we are supporting $3.2 billion standard gauge railway connecting Tanzania to the Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi. We supported the transport corridor that links Addis Ababa to Nairobi and Mombasa, which today has reduced the time to travel from 3 days to 1 day and expanded trade between both nations by 400%. The bank's last mile connectivity project in Kenya has helped to increase the number of Kenyans connected to national electricity grid from 2.42 million households in 2014 to 9.7 million households in 2024. And this has helped the country to increase electricity access from 36% to 76% over the same period. Also, the Lake Turkana, the wind project in Kenya, is today the largest operational wind power mill in all of Africa. As President Ruto of Kenya said when he conferred me with Kenya's highest national honor, the Chief of the Order of the Golden Heart, a great recognition for the work of the bank. He said, and I quote, "I am proud of the journey we started together 10 years ago. I can see its fruits. Kenyans benefit. Kenyan can feel its benefits." And this is the same all across Africa that I go with my staff. Today, the Kasungula Bridge connecting Zambia to Malawi and Namibia is expanding regional trade in Southern Africa. Since 1974, the collective dream of the people of Senegal and of Gambia was to have a bridge connecting both countries. That dream was realized by the African Development Bank and the African Development Fund. This impressive Senegambia bridge and the 24 kilometers road leading up to it has cut travel down from 2 days to less than 10 minutes. The Port Autonome de Lomé in Togo has expanded and been turned into a major transit port. In Comoros, we supported the construction of roads linking the islands. In Egypt, the bank supported Gabal El Asfar, a water serves 12 million residents. It is now the largest water treatment plant in Africa, and is set to serve a total of almost 18 million people by 2040. And I was just there about a week ago to see President El-Sisi on that. The bank supported the new Ouarzazate solar complex in Morocco, which is the world's largest concentrated solar power plant at the time of its completion. We launched the Lagos to Abidjan Highway Corridor, for which the African Development Bank is supporting the feasibility studies, and we have mobilized $15 billion in investment interest towards this. Mais je dois vous dire quelque chose de très important.
Let me say something that is so important. His Excellency President Alassane Ouattara told me, additional, if you do not start the works for this corridor, please stay in Abuja. And I saw President Buhari, who was my president, and he told me, if you do not do that road, stay in Abidjan. So you know I'm a nomad.
I want to thank the Excellencies and all the President to us actually doing that. So thank you, sirs. In Nigeria, we are implementing the development of special agro-industrial processing zones in 8 states and the Federal Capital Territory. We have mobilized $2.9 billion to support the establishment of these zones in 28 more states of Nigeria. Your Excellencies, we stood by countries when it mattered the most. The countries that were under sanctions to clear their debt arrears to the bank, including Somalia and Sudan, and all of my shareholders are here, and they have been exemplary in understanding and supporting us through that. And today, thanks to their support and the support from the African Development Fund, Somalia is showing tremendous recovery and resilience. Excellencies, thanks to the African Development Fund and the bank's Technology for African Agricultural Transformation, which we call TAT, Sudan, even in the midst of the conflict, is showing remarkable progress towards achieving self-sufficiency in wheat. With our support, it achieves 50% self-sufficiency in wheat in 2023 and 85% by 2024. We are also standing with Zimbabwe to clear its arrears to the bank and other creditors. As champion of the debt arrears clearance process, working with His Excellency former President Chisano, who is here with us, we have supported Zimbabwe, and they are making significant progress. I am pleased that the International Monetary Fund's staff monitor program will soon be concluded. And yesterday we were there. It was such an emotive time to see how far we have come. There's hope ahead. The past 10 years were filled with never before seen multiple and simultaneous crises. The COVID-19 to geopolitical tensions emanating from the Russian war in Ukraine, which in turn triggered a global food crisis. At the same time, a global debt crisis and devastating climate change posed untold hardships and challenges. In the midst of this polycrisis, your bank, the African Development Bank Group, strongly supported by its shareholders, stood strong and innovatively supported Africa as it navigated each crisis. Africa survived. Africa was resilient. Africa grew out of them all, and Africa is still standing and standing tall. Thanks for your support. We stood up for Africa when it mattered the most, the COVID-19 crisis. Africa, the continent with the least room to maneuver, was effectively left alone in the midst of the most challenging global crisis it had ever faced in decades. No vaccines, no medicines, no oxygen, no masks, no gloves. As developed countries got second and third COVID-19 booster shots, vaccines, Africa was scrambling for just one shot for its population. With the support of our shareholders, the African Development Bank swung into bold action and launched a $3 billion social bond, the largest ever in world history at that time. To support Africa, we set up a crisis response facility for up to $10 billion for counter-cyclical support for our countries. Walking away from home, my exemplary staff and board of directors, we work hard and we delivered more for Africa even in the midst of all of that. Today, the African Development Bank Group, Your Excellencies, is implementing a $3 billion program for quality health infrastructure. A $3 billion program again for the development of local pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity in Africa. We created new institutions, such as the African Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation, to enable Africa to gain access to intellectual property rights and to protected technologies and processes for manufacturing vaccines and medicines. We strongly supported African agriculture, and in the process increased Africa's capacity to feed itself. Your Excellencies, in 10 years, our work allowed 104 million Africans to achieve food security and provided 13 million farmers with access to improved agricultural technologies. I see the impact of our work in supporting Africa to avoid a looming food crisis predicted when the war of Russia in Ukraine broke out. The news headlines were awash with predictions of a food crisis in Africa, as the continent stood to lose 30 million tons of food, wheat, maize, and oilseeds imported from Russia and Ukraine. The African Development Bank Group swung into immediate action with a $1.5 billion emergency food production facility. Our Feed Africa plan worked. In just 2 years, Your Excellencies, our work had allowed 14 million farmers across 30 countries to have access to improved seeds and fertilizers. They produced 44 million metric tons of food. That is 14 million metric tons of food than what we were losing from Russia and Ukraine. That's 116% above the target that we set. And the total value of the food, $17.3 billion US. Thanks to the bank's support, Ethiopia increased its agricultural areas, producing heat-tolerant wheat varieties, which grew from 5,000 hectares when we started there in 2018 to over 650,000 hectares by 2023. Today, Ethiopia is self-sufficient in wheat, and in less than 4 years, Ethiopia has become a net exporter of wheat. The landmark Feed Africa Summit, which was held in Dakar, then under President Macky Sall, brought together over 30 heads of state and government who signed the Food and Agriculture Delivery Compact to accelerate food production and food sovereignty in their countries, which was approved unanimously then by the African Union. We mobilized $72 billion globally for Africa's food security, working with our partners. The inspiration of the Feed Africa Summit informed our next bold action to achieve universal access to electricity in Africa. To fast-track access to electricity, the African Development Bank and the World Bank, myself and the president of the World Bank, Ajay Banga, we jointly launched what's called the Mission 300 in Dar es Salaam to connect 300 million people in Africa to electricity by 2030. At the Africa Energy Summit in January of this year, we organized, hosted, and co-chaired, along with Our Excellency, President Samia Suluhu Hassan, a historic gathering of over 48 African countries, where leaders unanimously endorsed the Dakar Dar es Salaam Declaration on Energy Access with the full support of the African Union. Your Excellencies, the declaration marks an unprecedented continental commitment to accelerate energy access through coordinated national actions, regional interconnections, and enhanced investment in renewables and grid expansion. I'm pleased to say, Your Excellencies, that we mobilize $55 billion in support of these national energy compacts. Also, we advanced on providing universal access to clean cooking for women in Africa with a successful African Clean Cooking Summit held in Paris, again co-chaired by our dynamic president, Madam Samia Suluhu Hassan, and we mobilized $4 billion for clean cooking. I mean, why is it everybody in the world cooks with gas and nobody dies? Why is it that African women are collecting firewood and charcoal and dung to cook? It doesn't make any sense. And by the grace of God, we started dealing with that particular issue. We must be able to have our women cook and cook with pride like anybody else in the world. The African Development Bank launched what's called the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, AGIA, supported by the G7 to mobilize $10 billion for climate-resilient infrastructure all across Africa. We strongly supported the youth and the women. The bank's Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, AFAWA, approved $2.5 billion in support of over 24,000, in fact, it's $2.9 billion, in support of over 24,000 women-owned businesses all across Africa, expanding access of women businesses to finance through 185 financial institutions in 44 countries. And Excellencies, you know, our women in Africa, I mean, I've never seen a bird that flies with two wings. Every bird has two wings. We have to make sure that women in Africa have access to finance, period. In support of the youth and to help unleash their potential, the bank launched what's called the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks, which will expand access to finance to create youth-based wealth all across Africa. We expanded the voice and participation of civil society. I was with them yesterday. Across all of the bank's projects, we instituted a civil society forum each year to interact, to engage more transparently. Today, rather than being adversaries, we are strategic partners. We significantly strengthened the financial architecture in Africa, thanks to our African Development Fund donors. We raised $8.9 billion for African Development Fund's 16th replenishment. And that is the largest ever in the history of the fund since its establishment in 1973. We innovated and developed a new financial framework that will allow the African Development Fund to mobilize $27 billion from the global capital markets. It's my time here to actually ask that we please thank all of our donors to the African Development Fund, because without that, we'll not be able to support in all of these 37 countries. Thank you. The shareholders of the bank showed extraordinary support and confidence in our leadership and management of the bank. When I was first elected president in 2015, the capital of the bank stood at $93 billion. From 2015 to 2025, with the support of our shareholders, we grew the bank's capital from $93 billion to $318 billion. Thank you. We put that expanded capital into remarkable use with unprecedented financial support to all of our African countries. Let me explain for perspectives. Since the establishment of the African Development Bank in 1964 until 2014, its total approvals were $118 billion. However, in the past 10 years alone, under my presidency with our boards of directors and my staff, our total approvals were $102 billion. That represents 46% of all the approvals in the history of the African Development Bank Group. We have also ramped up our disbursements. The total disbursements of the bank group in the last 10 years alone at $59 billion represents almost half of all the disbursements in the history of the African Development Bank Group. These are not just numbers. Thanks to your collective support, this represents a new dynamism, a scale of transformative impact of the African Development Bank Group that at any point in its history, we provided significant financial support to African financial institutions, from commercial banks to regional development finance institutions to multilateral development finance institutions, boosting their capital bases. Under my presidency, with our board of directors and my staff, we set up and built Africa 50 from scratch to what it is today, for which I'm extremely proud. A first-rate private equity infrastructure investment platform with portfolio companies now worth over $7 billion. We work very closely and strongly and supported the African Union. This includes a provision of about $12 million in institutional support, over $17 million to the African Continental Free Trade Area, and over $27 million to the African Center for Disease Control. The African Investment Forum, launched by the bank and its partners in 2018, has since mobilized $225 billion in investment interest in Africa across several projects. Excellencies, the African Development Bank has strongly supported several African countries in tackling the effects of climate change. The African Adaptation Acceleration Program, which we call AAAP, is financing commitments of $25 billion from the bank and in partnership with the Global Center for Adaptation. And I'm glad to say, Your Excellencies, today it is the largest climate adaptation program in the world. Over the past 10 years, Your Excellencies, the African Development Bank Group has become a global leader in financial innovations that have enabled us to stretch our balance sheets and deliver exceptional impact. The bank led with the use of synthetic securitization in 2015, becoming the first multilateral development bank in the world to do so. The African Development Bank also launched a $750 million hybrid capital in the global capital market in 2024, becoming also the first multilateral financial institution in the world to do so, opening up a new asset class for investors globally. The African Development Bank, your bank, spearheaded, together with the Inter-American Development Bank, the framework to allow the rechanneling of the IMF special drawing rights, SDRs, to multilateral development banks, which we can leverage by 4 to 8 times to provide much needed financial constitutional financing at scale. Excellencies, the image, the respect, and global confidence in the bank have soared through our active and unprecedented participation in the summit meetings of the G7 and G20. With your backing, as President, along with my colleagues and our board of directors, we have amplified the voice and the needs of Africa at the highest levels globally. As my mandate that you have given me as President of the bank draws to a close, I am extremely proud of the work that we have done and the incredible impact of the bank has had on the daily lives of millions of Africans. This has been a collaborative effort that we all can take pride in. We maintained the stellar AAA credit ratings of the bank for 10 years under very difficult circumstances with your support, with all the 3 global credit rating agencies, from Fitch to Moody's to Standard & Poor's, even in the most difficult times of COVID. And I want to thank all my governors. I knew how many calls I made. I knew how many doors I locked. I knew how many conversations I had. But I knew how much your heart was with us that helped us to survive and to continue to sail despite all the challenges. To you, our governors and countries, I say thank you. Thank you so very much. It was not an easy thing, but I'm extremely grateful to you. Your Excellencies, the independent review of the governance systems of the African Development Bank by our governors asked for in 2020 was completed about 2 months ago. The review showed that the African Development Bank is very well governed, respects the independence of its oversight organs, and is at par with all of its peers globally. In view of all that transpired in 2020, I feel vindicated and enormously happy. I am exceptionally proud of the African Development Group that I lead. We developed a new institution, the African Financial Stability Mechanism, unanimously approved by the African Union to support Africa to refinance its debt on global capital markets, reduce contagion effects of economic shocks, and be the Africa's first financial safety net. The African Development Bank, your bank, is today globally recognized and respected. Your Excellencies, the African Development Bank was ranked as the best multilateral financial institution in the world by Global Finance. Your bank, the African Development Bank, was ranked for 2 consecutive years the most transparent financial institution globally by Public Watch Fund for our sovereign operations, scoring last year 98.8% on the Transparency Index, the highest ever in the history of the Global Transparency Index. And in 2024, the bank achieved its highest income ever in its 60-year history. The African Development Fund, the concessionary financing institution of the bank, ranked second best in the world and higher than all 55 bilateral financing organizations in all developed countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. As I complete my 2 5-year terms as president of the African Development Bank, I am proud of the legacy we are leaving behind, and I say we, it's a collective effort, for my successor, for the bank, and for Africa. We have built a world-class financial institution that will continue to advance Africa's position within a rapidly changing global development and geopolitical environment. I did not walk alone. I walked with an exemplary group of people at different points during my past 10 years. I am thankful for the exemplary support of the boards of directors over the past 10 years, for your strong support, for your strong oversight over our work and operations. And I'd like my board that currently are here today to please stand and be recognized. It's my time to recognize my board of directors. Wherever you are, please stand and be recognized, and I appreciate it. Thank you. They're a very tough board, but we get things done. I am very thankful to you, our board of governors. You have been simply incredible, and you have given us exceptional shareholder support. You were there for us, and you were there with us in the up times. You were there with us in the down times. You never doubted us. I'm indebted to you for your support. To our host country, thank you very much for your incredible hospitality. My special thanks and gratitude goes again to my senior brother, President Alassane Ouattara. Who steadfastly thank you. Who steadfastly stood by me, counseled me, supported me throughout my 10 years here as head of the bank. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I consider myself Ivorian. I lived here for 15 years before being elected president of the bank. I spent 5 years in Bouaké. I was principal economist for the Rice Development Association in Africa. I was in Korogo, Man, Ojene, Galoa, Daloa. I supervised 10 Ivorian students at the center and 9 of them had excellent with the congratulations of the examination panel. So apart from Nigeria, my country of birth, this is the country in which I have spent most of my life, so I consider myself Ivorian. Thank you, my dear brother, Mr. President. You were there. You supported me each time. Grace, could you please stand up? Let us celebrate our president. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the government and people of Côte d'Ivoire as well.
Now, under me, they approved my vision and our vision to build a new world-class headquarters for the African Development Bank right here in Abidjan. Je précise, ça sera le...
This will be the headquarters of the bank, the new headquarters of the bank.
Sky. It will send out a powerful signal for la Côte d'Ivoire, la banque.
For Côte d'Ivoire, the African Development Bank is here to stay. We are here to stay.
But please, no person is perfect, and no person is infallible. I have given my very best and made my own mistakes, all with good intentions. If in the course of my passionate and relentless drive to accelerate the agenda of Africa, I have offended some in word or in deed, through acts of commission or acts of omission, please know that it was never personal. Where applicable, I ask for your forgiveness. To close, I would like to express my deepest appreciation to my staff. Please, I want all my staff to stand, if you're here, for your dedication, for your hard work, for your diligence, for your commitment, for your dependability. From literally sleepless nights on missions, at global events, on project and country visits, you put up with my habit of working late. I never sleep. They know I never sleep. C'est pas un président qui dort, you dors pas.
I'm not a president who sleeps. I don't sleep.
Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, you show remarkable resilience, but today I must owe you an apology. I apologize for denying you sleep. You, my staff, are the ones that I will miss the most. You are simply amazing. You work extremely hard, and you delivered big for Africa. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your selfless work and loyal support. We have come a long way, and we did it all for Africa. Here is a high five to all of you, and keep the faith. And to my darling wife, Grace, I am deeply grateful for your being my rock. You prayed for me. You encouraged me. You inspired me. You sacrificed for me. You stayed unshakable by my side at all times. We weathered some heavy storms together, but God was with us. You always reminded me of the God who was with me on the mountaintop is also the one with me in the valley. Today, together, we made it to the mountaintops, we went through the valleys and the waters, and by the grace of God, we did not drown. Thank you very much, my love. Together, we gave African Development Bank and Africa our all. I'm very grateful to you, and I'm glad the best decision I ever made in my life was to marry you. I honestly gave Africa my heart, my mind, and my all. I fought for what I believe were in Africa's best interests, every single day and every turn in my 10 years as president. I will continue to serve Africa today and well into the future by God's grace. I am thoroughly convinced that God did not make a mistake in creating me as an African. I took my oath of office for a second time on September 1st, 2020. I made a simple prayer. God, as I start my second time as president of the African Development Bank and humble myself before you, I ask that you give me wisdom and that Africa will shine and prosper. Together with all of our shareholders, help us to make Africa shine. That is because I know that without God, I am absolutely nothing. For all we have achieved, I owe to God's infinite mercies and grace. So now unto God, the Almighty God, who held us up and blessed the works of all of our hands at the African Development Bank over the last 10 years. To him be all praise and glory forever. May God bless the African Development Bank. May God bless the African Development Fund. May God bless the Nigerian Trust Fund that together make up the African Development Bank. May God bless the boards of directors, past and present. May God bless the boards of governors, past and present. May God bless the amazing staff of the bank, past and present. My hardworking and innovative senior management teams, and of course the incredible members of the Staff Council, past and present. May God comfort the families of some of my staff that I lost along the way over the past 10 years, especially during COVID. I will carry with me the precious memories of your service to the bank. I only wish you are here today. May God send rains of blessings on every one of the bank's 81 shareholder countries to continue to support Africa. And now, to my own beloved country, Nigeria, and the presidents who nominated and supported me for election twice as president, I owe my deepest appreciation and gratitude. To President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, who nominated me for my first term, and to President Muhammadu Buhari, who carried it forward and backed my election and stood stoically behind me during the challenging times and supported my re-election for second time. Thank you, sirs, most sincerely. My immense appreciation and gratitude also go to Nigeria's former presidents and heads of state, President Olusegun Obasanjo, General Abdulsalam Abubakar, General Yakubu Gowon, General Ibrahim Babangida, former Vice President of Nigeria, Namadi Sambo, Atiku Abubakar, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, the former governor of my state, Ibikunle Amosun, who helped me at various times. They all played major roles in supporting me. And of course, my dear sister, an amazing woman, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. She was then the Minister of Finance of Nigeria, and she was my indefatigable campaigner-in-chief in 2015. To President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, my president, and the Vice President Kashim Shettima, for your support over the past 2 years, I am profoundly very grateful. Thank you for graciously approving the replenishment of the Nigerian Trust Fund for another 15 years. I understand will be about $500 million. May God bless you, all of our heads of state and government in Africa, for your incredible kindness, support for me and my colleagues over the past decade. May God bless the African Union and all the regional economic communities, the private sector, the civil society, the youth and the women of Africa, the multilateral and bilateral institutions, the partner institutions, the media organizations who supported us along the way. Together, we collectively join hands around the baobab tree of Africa's challenges and opportunities. Thank you for believing in Africa. May Africa always thrive and shine. And may our light never grow dim. God bless you all. Merci beaucoup.
You may be seated. Thank you, Mr. President, for such a heartwarming and motivating speech that I'm sure has energized those who are contending to be president of the bank. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce the video of the host country.
La Côte d'Ivoire avance, et l'avance vite, portée par une vision claire, celle d'un développement durable, inclusif et résolument tourné vers l'avenir. Au cœur de cette dynamique, le plan national de développement 2021-2025 avec pour objectif l'amélioration concrète du bien-être des populations à travers un développement socio-économique ambitieux. Et les résultats parlent d'eux-mêmes. L'économie ivoirienne est en pleine expansion. Aujourd'hui, 9e puissance économique d'Afrique, la Côte d'Ivoire attire de plus en plus d'investisseurs. Le taux d'investissement a quasiment doublé, passant de 14,1% en 2011 à plus de 26,2% en 2024. L'agriculture reste le pilier de cette croissance. Premier producteur mondial de cacao et de noix de cajou, premier en Afrique pour le caoutchouc naturel et deuxième pour l'huile de palme. À cela s'ajoute une amélioration continue des infrastructures qui renforce la compétitivité du pays. Le développement économique permet de financer des infrastructures de qualité. Depuis quelques années, ce sont plus de 1600 km de routes interurbaines, 400 km d'autoroutes, 57 ponts et échangeurs qui ont été construits. Dans le domaine de l'énergie, le taux d'électrification est passé de 33% en 2011 à plus de 94% en fin 2024. Un progrès spectaculaire qui transforme le quotidien des Ivoiriens. L'éducation est aussi une priorité. L'enseignement supérieur progresse avec des institutions de référence comme l'Institut national polytechnique Félix Houphouët-Boigny, aujourd'hui classé 2e meilleure université d'Afrique francophone. Côté santé, les avancées sont tout aussi notables. Aujourd'hui, 80% des Ivoiriens vivent à moins de 5 km d'un centre de santé. Un accès facilité qui permet aux populations de mieux se soigner et de mieux vivre. Dans un contexte régional complexe, la Côte d'Ivoire a renforcé sa sécurité. L'indice de sécurité est passé de 4 en 2011 à 1,2 en 2024. Face à ces enjeux de développement, la Côte d'Ivoire a pu compter sur un partenaire stratégique de longue date, le groupe de la Banque africaine de développement. Institution panafricaine dont le siège est établi dans le pays même, à Abidjan, l'Afbd joue un rôle crucial dans l'accompagnement des ambitions du pays depuis 1971. Plus de 5 milliards de dollars ont été investis dans 110 projets nationaux. Dans cette optique, le soutien du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement est particulièrement significatif. L'institution accompagne notamment la transformation agricole par un apport financier à 8 agropoles sur les 9 que compte le pays. L'agropole du Bélier à Yamoussoukro en est un exemple concret. Et dans le nord, où l'agriculture représente 65% de l'économie locale, les chantiers sont déjà lancés. Aussi, l'appui de l'Afbd dans l'extension de la centrale électrique de Cyprel a permis une production supplémentaire de 800 GWh par an, assez pour alimenter plus de 247 000 foyers. Avec cette dynamique, désormais la Côte d'Ivoire exporte de l'électricité vers ses voisins, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Mali, consolidant sa position régionale. Et à Abidjan, le projet de transport urbain lancé en 2018 transforme la mobilité. Des projets d'envergure comme le 4e pont et la rocade Y4 qui ont désenclavé des zones importantes de la capitale ont été rendus possibles grâce au soutien du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, un partenaire engagé dans l'amélioration de la qualité de vie des Ivoiriens depuis des décennies. La Côte d'Ivoire est aujourd'hui un pays d'opportunités. Un pays où la croissance économique va de pair avec le progrès social. Un pays qui mise sur l'humain, l'innovation et la stabilité.
Please put your hands together once more for Côte d'Ivoire that has done so well. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may we please rise to welcome His Excellency Mr. Alassane Ouattara, President of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, to deliver his opening address.
Merci. I thank you. Could you please take your seats now? And will you please rise and give a clean a round of applause? Bravo, Akin. Bravo to you.
Bravo, bravo, bravo. Merci à tous.
Thank you all. Thank you for your brilliant speech and for your words of thanks to all of us. Your Excellency Azalia Soumani, President of the Union of the Comoros, my dear brother and friend, Your Excellency Mr. John Dramani Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana, my young brother, Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, twin brothers. And I affectuously call John Mahama, I call him John the First. Do you know why? Because John the First was it's John the Third. The first was Rawlings, the second was Kufuor, and John the Third was John Atta Mills, and then now we have John Dramani, John the Fourth. Your Excellency Joachim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, Your Excellency Vice Presidents, Prime Ministers, and heads of governments representing heads of states of brotherly countries, Mr. Prime Minister of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, head of government, the heads of the national institutions, Madame Niale Kaba, Ministry of the Economy, the Planning and Development of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, and chairperson of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, and not the World Bank. You know, it is a continental bank. It is our World Bank, so to speak. Mr. President of the African Development Bank Group, my dear friend and brother Akin, honorable ministers, distinguished governors for the African Development Bank Group, Your Excellencies, heads of international organizations and development partners, distinguished representatives of international organizations, Your Excellencies, ambassadors, and members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished representatives of the senior management of the African Development Bank, distinguished representatives of the private sector, and there are many here, and civil society organizations as well, distinguished members of the media, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Akwaba to you all. Welcome to the 2025 annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group, which are holding here in Abidjan, our beautiful capital city, from the 26th to the 30th of May 2025. Let me start by reiterating To my friends, my brothers and heads of state, my warm thanks for being present here in Abidjan, particularly my brother Azali. It is not a short trip at all. I am grateful that you took the time to come and support us, as well as my brother Chisano. I know that as for Mahama, he is at home here in Côte d'Ivoire. Thank you for being here, my dear brothers. I would also like to hail the presence of the vice presidents, prime ministers, head of government, senior representatives of member states, and of officials of partner institutions and private sector actors. My special congratulations go to Minister Nyale Kaba. Nyale, could you please rise? Thank you. You are the governor for the African Development Bank Group. I thank you for the excellent cooperation between the ADB and Côte d'Ivoire and for the successful organization of these annual meetings. Akin mentioned what has been done for our country, but I don't just want to simply congratulate him. I want to say that with Nyale Kaba, you were a very good couple. You were a strong team, you know. And Grace is my sister and friend, and she understands what I'm trying to say. Let me also congratulate Akin for his commitment to the development of our continent. All what you showed here speaks for itself and shows to what extent you have revitalized the bank. And I want to say congratulations once again, my friend and dear brother. Under your stewardship, the ADB recorded exceptional performances under the high fives, as you said, namely Light Up and Power Africa, Feed Africa, Industrialize Africa, Integrate Africa, and improve the quality of life for Africans.
Despite the challenges that the continent has had to face in the recent past, we can certainly say that the situation would have been much worse without the contribution of the African Development Bank, for which we thank you. Your integrated approach has made it possible to focus the bank's intervention on essential levers for sustainable and inclusive growth. And I would like to thank all participants to these annual meetings, be they public decision makers, private sector, or civil society organizations, representatives of national or international media from across the continents. I would like to greet you all, and I hope that the media will underscore some of the positive and joyful sides of our continent. Africans exert themselves and make a lot of effort, which is not always visible in international and national media. So this request is made to the media to be more positive in your outlook and reporting. Clearly, we do have challenges given the global context, be it Russia's invasion of the Ukraine or the war in the Sudan, the war in Gaza with Israel, and etc. But Africa deserves some encouragement and some good news. So we trust you with that. So please underscore the positive news and the very good performance of the African Development Bank, and please continue to promote and encourage that. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the current annual meetings are holding against a global backdrop characterized by some major and complex
challenges. The geopolitical conflicts that I mentioned a moment ago in Eastern Europe and in the Middle East, and in fact, I referred to the invasion of Russia by Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza and Israel, but these are clearly conflicts and should be named as such. The intensification of extreme climate events and tightening financial conditions, the dropping public finance or development public aid, as well as trade wars, exacerbated trade wars since the beginning of the year, have created an unstable global environment where the very principles of multilateralism are being called into question. And in fact, as President Adesina was stating, this has devastating impacts on fragile countries. All of these new events risk jeopardizing, fragilizing developing economies, the African economies, by further exacerbating inflation, the risk of debt overhang, as well as macroeconomic imbalances and social inequalities. So against this backdrop, global economic prospects are quite uncertain, and whereas those of Africa more specifically, the outlook for Africa remains clearly insufficient to meet the needs of the continent itself and its population. The issues of related to terrorism, to civil conflicts, greatly impact our continent, and strong demographic growth as well is a further challenge, although the growth rates that we are seeing in Africa from that perspective are slightly higher than those in developed countries. In reality, the slightly higher population growth in Africa is positive. According to the IMF, the global growth should, on average, be about 3.1% during 2026-2030. And in Africa, this growth should step up slightly, going from 3.3% in 2024 to 4% in 2026. This slight discrepancy, however, is absorbed by the demographic growth, meaning that the poverty continues to grow and to worsen in many African countries. We need, therefore, more efforts for this growth to deliver better living conditions for populations, for these to deliver transformation and root and branch transformation across our continent. We need massive improvements and investments in social dimensions, as well as the strategic leveraging of strategic levers, of which are human, natural capital, financial resources, and innovation. This is why I'd like to welcome and celebrate the overall theme of our annual meetings, which call us to make more of Africa's capital and to ensure that it works better for Africa's development. This is a genuine challenge. It's an opportunity as well to discuss the reforms and policies necessary in order to enable the human, natural, financial, and trade capital to genuinely contribute to the structural transformation of African economies. Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, I may not be as eloquent as my younger brother, President Adesina, but let me state that Africa has remarkable potential driven by talented, youthful population, natural resources, abundant mining resources. It's very attractive to investment opportunities and very promising economic outlook. But given this potential, you may ask why such a slow socioeconomic transformation across the continent. This is very much a paradox. As I stated earlier, demographic growth is one of the constraints we face, but a better use of capital should free and enable better use of our capital and accelerate a transition to more inclusive, green, and resilient economies. President Chissano was saying earlier that as he flew over and was nearing Côte d'Ivoire, he was impressed to see all of the green coverage. But I wanted to say, in fact, and I'd like to congratulate my government and the Prime Minister, who's focused very much on tree planting. In fact, on a yearly basis, we have a day rather, and we have an objective focusing on planting a tree for every Ivorian. And so I continue to encourage Ivorians to do so regularly, because our forests, unfortunately, or most of our forests, some 80% of forests were destroyed in the period since independence to date. I'm also happy to note that the themes of our meeting cover some cross-cutting aspects, such as technological progress, which is a key driver for enhanced productivity, and the leveraging of capital. The experience of East Asian countries demonstrate that key driver of growth, competitiveness, and economic transformation stems from national technological capacity and growth. And I'm happy to see how interested our youth are in these sectors. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, in support to our member states, the role of financial and development institutions is pivotal in ensuring implementation of integrated policies across the continent. Clearly, each one of our countries needs to improve and fine-tune the implementation of such reform policies. And I'd like to underscore the role of the bank in this particular regard, and I'd like to thank and congratulate the whole African Development Bank group team. Since its inception in 1964, the African Development Bank has profoundly transformed the social and economic realities in Africa. As President Adesina portrayed earlier, we can certainly commend all of these successive presidents, and particularly President Adesina, for all of these accomplishments. So the bar is set quite high for the incoming president, and we will be very eager to follow the progress to be made over the next 5 and 10 years, and to compare that performance to the bar set by President Adesina. Significant resources have been invested by and leveraged by the bank. Many accomplishments have been made across the continent in the areas of food security, industrialization, powering our countries, enhanced transport infrastructure, regional integration policies, as well as the overall improvement in living conditions for our populations. And I would like, in fact, to commend the commitment and the doggedness of President Adesina as well as his predecessors. They have been able to place our institution at the very, or amongst some of the top institutions worldly. The bank's strategic drive dovetails perfectly with national and international development agendas, of which the United Nations 2030 agenda, as well as the African Union's 2063 agenda for Africa. And in this regard, Côte d'Ivoire, or in Côte d'Ivoire, the African Development Bank has been a key partner in mobilizing necessary resources and ensuring the success of our various national development plan. I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to recognize the quality of the cooperation between Côte d'Ivoire and the AFDB. We have seen substantial support, which has grown twofold in the past 10 years, and we'd like to thank the bank and thank you for focusing on what we have accomplished in the past few years together. Ladies and gentlemen, these annual meetings are convened to, or will be hosting the election of the incoming president of the African Development Bank. And the incoming president will continue the work and continue the vibrant work carried out under the helm of Adesina, and will ensure that the bank continues to play a premier role in the continent's advance towards inclusive social and economic development. I'm convinced that during the exchanges we will have during these annual meetings, my last page is a little bit, it's sticking. And yet I wrote this statement myself. I was up until 4 a.m. It is the last page. Very well. It is my last page.
Je voudrais, en fait, je pensais que mon...
I thought my statement was as long as President Adesina's, but in any case, I am convinced, as I was saying, that the discussions we will have during these annual meetings will shed light on strategies and various measures able to accelerate Africa's development. You see, Adesina, these are, I seem to be quoting you here. So let me close by stating how proud we are to host the African Development Bank, and thank you once again. Thank you, dear President. Thank you to the boards of directors, of governors. Thank you very much to all of our guests for honoring us with your presence here. We are very grateful of your support. We will do everything we can to ensure that the bank continues to serve this continent. I'd like, therefore, to declare the annual meetings of the African Development Bank group open, and thank you once again, each one of you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands once more for the President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with that strong and inspiring opening address, we have come to the end of the opening ceremony and the beginning of the annual meetings. We will now transition to the high-level presidential dialogue, making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. And may I plead with you to please remain in the room. It will be a short one. Thank you very much.
Well, Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, distinguished governors of the African Development Bank Group, heads of multilateral development finance institutions, development finance institutions, captains of industry, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to these opening ceremonies of the African Development Bank Group, right here in the beautiful and very vibrant city of Abidjan, in the equally beautiful country of Côte d'Ivoire, a capital city and a country whose economy and infrastructure is growing at the speed of light. No doubt, testimonies to the visionary and bold leadership of President Ouattara. Congratulations. My name is Victor Oladokun, and it's a pleasure and an honor to co-moderate this presidential dialogue session with my very dear colleague and friend, Marie-Angèle Touré.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Victor. Excellencies, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. Akwaba, which in Côte d'Ivoire means welcome. You often hear Akwaba when you take part in high-level events or upon arrival at the airport. Akwaba is not only a word, though. It's really a philosophy, and this hospitality is experienced on a daily basis. So, in fact, ladies and gentlemen, do you think that when Dr. Akinwumi Adesina came 10 years ago to settle here with his wife 10 years ago in Côte d'Ivoire, do you think that he had imagined at the time that he'd be standing here in front of thousands of people saying, I feel like an Ivorian? Well, that is the very spirit of Ivorian hospitality, and I think we can celebrate that. Let me turn to Victor.
Nigerian, how do you feel when you are in Côte d'Ivoire? Victor, you can tell us the truth, please.
Well, if President Adesina is a citizen of Côte d'Ivoire, the least I can be is an adopted, partially adopted Ivorian. But je suis à la maison.
I feel at home in Côte d'Ivoire.
Personne ne résiste.
No one can resist the charms of Ivorian hospitality. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a genuine honor and pleasure to be with you in this room where we can see a very well-filled room, a room in which we are charting the course for a more sovereign, more inclusive Africa.
Course of this session, the shifting winds of global trade and aid and economic challenges actually signify the importance of this 2025 annual meetings of the African Development Bank, and also brings into very, very sharp focus the theme of this presidential dialogue, making Africa's capital work for Africa's development. It underscores the need, no doubt, for strong institutions, strong economies, stronger private and public sector financing, stronger accountability, stronger transparency, and certainly much more innovative financial instruments with which to drive Africa's enormous and amazing potential.
Indeed, Victor. Mesdames et messieurs.
Ladies and gentlemen, over the next 45 minutes, it's a privilege to explore how various African nations are already leveraging the huge wealth within this continent, be it its natural, financial, or human capital, to ensure sustainable, innovative, and resilient growth, one that's focused on the future. We are looking at an Africa that's looking to the future. Before we come to the merit of our discussion, let me call on all of our guests, media representatives, all of you in this room, please share this event on social media. Use hashtag AFDBAM 2025 and invite your various communities to follow us live, to follow this session on YouTube. This is your dialogue as well.
Go ahead and let's get our session started. If you could start with the introductions and welcomes to the platform.
Bien évidemment.
Yes, of course. It's my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome with all of the protocol due to them. We'd like to warmly welcome to the stage His Excellency Mr. Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of the Comoros.
Mr. John Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana. As well as His Excellency Dr. Philip Isidore Mpango, Vice President, United Republic of Tanzania, representing Her Excellency Mrs. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania.
Et enfin,
and I would also like to invite His Excellency Mr. Ali Mahaman Lamine, Prime Minister of the Republic of Niger, to kindly join us on this panel.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous
Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, we will kickstart our high-level discussion. My first question is addressed to His Excellency Mr. Azali Assoumani, President of the Union of Comoros. Mr. President, the Comoros are blessed by nature, blessed with huge potential in the blue economy. We hear this very regularly. At a time when island countries are seeking to leverage their maritime resources as drivers of growth, how is your government building on this source to build a sustainable, job-generating economy, one that's turned towards the future?
D'accord. Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam. At the outset, I would like to avail myself of this wonderful opportunity to congratulate and thank President Ouattara for all of the excellent arrangements that have been made. As is the custom, whenever we come to Côte d'Ivoire, we are wonderfully welcomed here. We also were very moved by the speech made by our brother Adesina, as he said, 10 years years at the helm of this institution. The performance of this institution, its standing at the international level speaks for itself. We'd like to thank him and tell him you have two graces to celebrate: the grace of God and the grace who stands by your side, and wherever you go, they will be with you, and you'll always be successful. To respond to your question, this is, of course, this is a crucially important question. We are an island country. We are faced with climate change. So we are an island country, but we are comprised of 4 islands, in fact, and therefore this puts us before major challenges. As you said, this is a country 2,000 square kilometers, land kilometers, but 150,000 square kilometers of sea, of maritime space. So this is a huge potential in terms of area. The challenge, however, is climate change, rising sea levels, piracy, illicit fishing, pollution. These are the many challenges we must face. But I can reassure you that the African Development Bank and President Adesina has been very supportive. And to respond to your question specifically, as you said, the blue economy requires, of course, the fisheries, fishery capacity that we have. Unfortunately, that's still undertapped. But we are focused on this. And then to date, we have been able to use some 30% of this resource through traditional fishery techniques, but we've worked with partners such as the bank, who have been willing to finance us, to work in partnerships as well, in order to transform our fishing capacity to commercial grade. We have worked with, we have been able rather to train our fishers. We have been working with partners. We have sought out investors as well, who have demonstrated their interest and supported us. But as you know, we have fisheries and tourism as our key assets. This is very much our focus, madam. But of course, we need your support, your assistance, be it at multilateral level or bilateral level. A country such as Côte d'Ivoire, with the experience you have, I think would be very useful. So once again, thank you very much. And our cooperation is long-standing. It's about 50 years old. We will continue to do more, and I'd like to thank you, madam.
Thank you very much, President Assoumani, and thank you very much again also for your passion, even as a leader. Our next question is going to come to President Mahama. Well, the big elephant in the room is the global shifts that are taking place geopolitically. In the midst of growing trade uncertainties globally, what is Ghana doing to leverage the value of its tremendous commodities and natural resources? And how well is Ghana coping with the growing uncertainty right now?
Thank you very much. After the Second World War, we agreed that a multilateral rules-based trading system was a better way to go. And so a lot of work was done by the World Trade Organization, together with all our countries, to set up the rules for trade amongst ourselves. Unfortunately, that system is being appended, and countries have decided to impose tariffs based on their own interests. And so we've transitioned into a transactional world. It sends a signal to Africa that we need to pull ourselves out by our bootstraps, because there's not going to be a free dinner anywhere. And that means that we must, one, mobilize more revenue locally. And I mean, with the assistance of the African Development Bank, I think that we're doing quite fine. But domestically, we must mobilize revenue locally. We must add value to our products, and we must get a better share for the natural resource endowment that God has given us. And so I believe that is a signal to all of us to look inward and see how we can trade more amongst ourselves. Happily, we have the protocol on the African Continental Free Trade Area, which the majority of African nations have ratified. And so what it means is that we have the opportunity to be able to trade amongst ourselves. And I'm happy that the African Development Bank and other partners have focused on investing in the trade infrastructure amongst ourselves. It's not enough to just have a protocol on continental free trade. If you don't have the railways, you don't have the highways, you don't have the aviation connections to be able to exchange goods amongst yourselves, it amounts to naught. And that's why the investment in railways, in ports, in highways and others is very timely. And I think we must take advantage of that. In Ghana, we have expanded our port and it's become a hub for receiving some of the biggest ships into our port because we have a deep draft of almost 16 meters. And so once we receive containers bound for any country from Namibia, Angola, Cameroon, all the way to Dakar, we can redistribute. And that means that we can also distribute any products that we have to export to all these other ports. And so that's positioning ourselves to be able to trade more with our colleague African countries.
Thank you very much, President Mahama. But let's also talk about value addition. Everyone in this room likes chocolate. I believe everybody does. But what I do know, and what we do know, is that other than Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, the largest producers of chocolate in the world, both countries only occupy a very, very small portion of the finished goods in terms of cocoa. What is it that your country, in conjunction with Cote d'Ivoire, can do, for example, to increase the level at where you're operating in the value chain globally?
That's why sometimes you notice that the World Economic Order is rigged against Africa. We can increase processing overnight, but you have non-tariff barriers in exporting into some of the markets. Unless they bring a processor from outside, from Europe, who comes and sets up a processing plant and gets all the regulatory things in place. I mean, an indigenous person setting up a processing plant sometimes has a very big difficulty exporting finished products into the EU market and into the American market. But I must say that we've made progress from a low of about 25% processed cocoa. Ghana has risen to about 40%, and I know Cote d'Ivoire is ahead of us. Cote d'Ivoire has done 50%, which is comfortable. And so 50% of Cote d'Ivoire's cocoa is processed domestically. Ghana is at 40%. We hope that over the next 4 or 5 years, we'll reach the stage of Cote d'Ivoire at 50% and push even further.
Thank you very much, President Mahama. We'll go next to Vice President Mpango. Your country has invested tremendously in infrastructure in the last few years, particularly in the area of transport infrastructure. You're expanding regional connectivity and trade. How is Tanzania mobilizing capital to achieve these very, very ambitious dreams that President Samia Suluhu has? And what role is the African Development Bank playing in that regard? Huge dreams, huge ambitions. How are you dealing with that?
Well, thank you very much. First, I wish to thank the government and the people of Cote d'Ivoire for a very warm welcome. Indeed, we really feel at home. Thank you very much. Straight to your question, indeed for us, infrastructure is really critical for the radical economic transformation that we are pursuing. The challenge is, of course, that infrastructure is very expensive. And therefore, we have had to work very hard to mobilize financing to put up the railways. We are doing a standard gauge railway that will connect us to neighboring Burundi and DRC. We are also doing major roads that will connect us
to our neighbors so that we are able to trade among ourselves. But for that to be done, we know very well that the terrain globally in terms of financing opportunities is not very good. The interest rates are very high in the capital market. And so we have had to, one, focus on how best we harness the private sector. How do we do that? We are deepening domestic capital markets. So, for example, we have issued the Samia Infrastructure Bond. We have done another bond to extend water in one of our local authorities in Tanga. We have done several green bonds, and this has helped us to mobilize financing internally. But not only that, we are also using pension fund resources to build bridges in Dar es Salaam and other towns, and we have found that quite helpful. But importantly also, we have put more energy in terms of improving our own tax administration, and particularly leveraging new technology. So we have electronic fiscal devices instead of relying on the human hand in collecting taxes. But we have also introduced a more efficient system of looking at the tax complaints from our taxpayers. So we introduced a tax ombudsman office in order that our taxpayers can raise grievances, if any, that they have against the tax authorities. But thirdly, I think very important, we have continued to mobilize external finance in terms of loans and grants. And here, the power of the African Development Bank has been extremely useful to us. We have used this leveraging power to mobilize finances for the standard gauge railway, for building our airports, for building our roads, and that way we have been doing quite well. But let me wind up with just one caution. In mobilizing external resources in particular, it is very important that we keep an eye on debt sustainability so that you avoid the risk of falling into the debt trap once again. So always keep an eye on ensuring that we don't go back to being a debt-distressed country. Thank you.
Very good cautionary words, Vice President Mpango. I just want to appeal to us in the hall. There seems to be a whole lot of noise in the back. Please, let's extend courtesies to the excellencies on the platform. Keep your voices down, and if you do need to speak, please go out of the hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victor. On va parler d'un autre moyen de...
Let us talk about another way to boost economic growth. I'm going to share some figures with you concerning Niger. Niger's GDP growth should reach 7.4% in 2025, thanks to oil production estimated at 30 million barrels. These are impressive figures. Mr. Prime Minister, how does your government intend to ensure that oil revenue will be used effectively so as to boost sustainable economic development, which is truly sustainable, in a bid to reduce poverty in Niger? Thank you very much. Allow me to start by acknowledging the wonderful performances and achievements by President Adesina this last decade at the African Development Bank Group. He said, thanks to the boards that supported him and countries that supported him, he was able to achieve this. He also said this was possible thanks to his spouse, and I would like to extend my regards to her. Let me continue by noting that Niger's growth rate is quite important, and we should grant Niger the possibility to continue its exploration. Niger, with two other countries of the AES, are jointly facing terrorism. Yesterday we were hit by terrorists, and my thoughts go to the victims. It is quite unjust. We have huge potential, not just oil. We have uranium, which we seized from the hands of those who had been exploring it for about 60 years. We have solar energy. We are a big country, and we have sun all year round. We also have coal, and it is the highest concentrated zone in West Africa, as well as other gas resources. To answer your question, the head of state of Niger, General Tiani, who has been at the helm of the state for the past 22 months, almost 23 months, has shown determination, and that is to explore and manage the natural resources in the best way possible, and by doing so with integrity. Back to the bank's president, beyond all of what had been mentioned, I would like to quickly remind us about the high fives. How to light up Africa. We have all of these resources which I've listed. How to feed Africa. 1 million, more than 1 million square kilometers, as well as rich soils. The AFDB is funding one of our major projects called the Kandaji project, and is going to produce power in Niger as well as farming areas so as to boost production in cereals for Niger. It's also going to help regenerate the ecosystem. On industrialization, for the last 22 months, we've tried to revive dormant industrial units so as to boost rice production. We've always noted in Niger that it's impossible to produce rice away from the river area, but we've been able to do so this year in the southern eastern zones in our country, and so it helps to cover the needs of people living in those zones or in those areas. The bank is funding the Trans-Saharan Highway, which cuts through Chad and gets to Niger. It's a major project. We have connectivity. And on human development, we took bold steps. You know, for us, oil needs to serve Niger first. And so the decision was to drop oil prices to ensure that it is accessible to all. We've taken measures on the health, regarding health, so as to provide health for the population, as well as education to be made available to youth. And so this is what I can say. We are working to ensure that growth is available for all. Thank you very much for sharing these initiatives with us. We see that these are not just dreams, but talking about costly living, efforts have been made to ensure sustainable development. We're talking about the wealth of Africa. President Assoumani, the diaspora of the Comoros is a strong economic force for your country. Remittances account for about 20% of the GDP in your country, in addition to, well, far beyond official development assistance. So what strategies are in place to ensure that these contributions from the diaspora are translated into concrete projects which are beneficial for the country? Thank you for this important question. You are right, madam. The diaspora of the Comoros represents about 50% of the population. Our population is approximately 800,000 inhabitants, and in the diaspora we have more than 350,000. And so it is a huge chunk of the entire population of the Comoros. We stand proud of our diaspora. Those living in France or elsewhere always think about their country. No matter how long they are away, they are full patriots at heart. Wherever they are, they think about their country. It is true. we had things in the past, but you've mentioned that we need to capitalize on these remittances, which stands above official development assistance. And it is approximately 320 million euros on a yearly basis. And so we need to draw benefits from this. So first, these remittances have ensured that we never face hunger issues, so famine crisis in the Comoros, thank God. And so our aim is to ensure that we have commodities for us to have consistent consumption, and so diaspora helps in this regard. This contributes to growing our economy. In addition, the diaspora of the Comoros needs to invest in the country to ensure that the country remains self-sufficient and to ensure that we are able to cater for our needs. In addition, our brothers and sisters in the diaspora living in France and who wish to visit the country or return to the country, they should be able to feel comfortable when they arrive and continue living. We know that at the moment we have extremism in these countries abroad, and so the diaspora might be tempted to return to the country. So we need to ensure that once they step foot in the country, they are able to feel comfortable back at home. As such, we have two challenges. First, with remittances, how do we ease transfer of finances? And so the Central Bank of the Comoros is working in this regard. I spoke with President Adesina how we can ensure that these money transfers are made easy and speedy, and for the funds not to remain stuck or lost in the air. And so we need to ensure that mechanisms are in place, and the most important mechanism is investment. How do we ensure that the diaspora transferring their money can proceed with investing in the country? We are a country where there are huge opportunities when talking about investments. Much is left to be done. We have road infrastructure. We have development as a whole. You have all spoken upstage here about transformation, and Africa has huge potential. Unfortunately, we proceed with crude exports and we gain nothing. However, we can process or transform on the spot. In 10 years, need I say 20 years, Africa will be the top market. Before exporting, we shall consume. And so we would have the capacity to consume, to transform, to export. Let us also encourage investors coming to our country because they have the capacity to invest. In addition, we should think about labor force. We could have investors coming in, and we should ensure that there are opportunities for everyone and we have qualified labor when people come to invest. In all African countries, it's important to note that we have a huge youth population, estimated at about 60% of the population. So the youths are there, and they can become our qualified labor force and make good progress. This is in the Sahel countries and all of our countries in Africa. We should ensure that these youths are not swayed away by terrorism. We should ensure that the money from the diaspora is put to good use, because our diaspora send their children to visit and live in the country. So it is important for them to feel safe when they come to the country. Among the flagship projects for the country's emergence by 2030, we have training and health. So we're focusing on training for the youth to gain skills and to be busy. As such, we are at peace. They can work during the day in the evening, they get back to their homes, they're with their families, and the next day they go back to work. If they are not trained, then they can do this. We also have another issue with immigration. We don't talk much about this. If these youths are trained, they will stay at home. And so what I can say is we have a patriotic diaspora. We thank them immensely for what they are doing, but we need to also capitalize on remittances, again, which stands above official development assistance. However, we can spare the rod and spoil the child. Even if the diaspora gives us much money, we still make a plea to the AFDB to continue its financial support. Our bank, the AFDB, is the second major support, and we hope next year is going to go beyond the World Bank as our major partner. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
It's quite rare to find a president who's also the chief marketing officer of the nation. And we just want to thank you, President Assoumani, for your passion. And if you're an investor in the House today, after these annual meetings, if I were you, I'd be knocking on the door of the Comoros. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My next question comes to President Mahama.
Bienvenue.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Excellency.
You're welcome.
Next question is to President Mahama. Earlier, Vice President Mpango cautioned, and very wisely so, about the need for debt sustainability. And Ghana in particular seems to have done very well in restructuring its high levels of public debt. But since you've come into office, what specifically are you doing to return Ghana to a much more acceptable and sustainable debt path?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's history. Everybody knows now that Ghana defaulted on its debt. We engaged in a painful debt exchange program to restructure our debts and to bring debt to GDP to a range of about 55 to 58% by 2028. The debt restructuring was concluded early this year with our bilateral creditors, and therefore it brought, one, the quantum of debt down, that's the size, but it also stretched out the repayment of the debt. That brought us down to about 75, 76% debt to GDP. Since then, we're left with just 3% of the debt. We've covered 97%. It's left with the commercial creditors who hold just about 3% of the debt. And once we do that, then it means that the whole debt restructuring has been completed. But like I said when I spoke at first, I said we need to put any credit that we take or any debt that we take into the most productive parts of our economy in providing infrastructure so that you can have a rate of return on debt. You must do smart borrowing, taking debt where you can create debt escrows so that the income for which you invested the credit can go to repay. For instance, I mean, expressways that are tolled where the toll revenues are escrowed so that they go to pay the expressway in 25 years or so. I think that these are the kinds of things that we should do. There are many examples. For instance, we built a first-class port, and that, again, did not sit on our public debt. We made our Ghana Ports and Harbours Authority and their partners, Meridian Port Services, build the port, which cost us about $1 billion, and that port is paying for itself, and that debt does not sit on our books. We built a new airport terminal we call Terminal 3, and again, we built it on the balance sheet of the Ghana Airports Company Limited. And so that project is paying for itself without sitting on our public debt. And so these are some of the innovative ideas that we need to introduce in order that our debts continue to be sustainable. But also increasingly, one of the push factors for the debt is the strength of the value of the local currency. Our debt continued to multiply because the cedi continued to grow weaker. And so you needed more cedis. Because our public debt is stated in cedis, the weaker the cedi becomes against the foreign currencies, the higher it pushes up your debt. Fortunately, I mean, some measures we put in place have recently begun to show results, and the CD has been strengthening. And so we've reduced our total debt over the last 5 months by almost 150 billion CDs, which is very significant. And so if that trajectory continues, the target of reaching 55 to 58% debt sustainability by 2028 will be reached by the end of this year. And that means that it gives us fiscal space to begin to invest in the most productive sectors of the economy. But like I said, we need to look inward, boost domestic revenue, cut wasteful government expenditure, fight corruption, and introduce better accountability in governance. And that is what the focus of my administration is.
Thank you very much, President Mahama. Very, very well said. I'm going to pivot back to Vice President Mpango once again. Tanzania in particular has shown great ambition with its $12.9 billion energy compact to expand clean and inclusive energy access by 2030. And Tanzania was the host of the Mission 300 summit, which was highly successful just in January. How is your government positioning itself to lead regional energy integration?
Well, thank you. The first thing that we have done has been to make huge investments in the production of energy. So we embarked on a very ambitious project on one of our major rivers, and we have now finished construction of a hydropower plant, which now produces 2,115 megawatts. But aside that, we are investing in other projects, particularly to utilize our natural gas reserves, which are estimated at around 57 trillion cubic feet. And at the moment, actually, that's the main source of power. So we are diversifying our power sources also. But in addition, we have continued to invest in other hydro projects around the country. We are also doing a program to harness our potential in what do we call it now? Geothermal.
Yes.
We have a geothermal potential in several of our regions, and we have now started working on one which will produce about 500 megawatts. So that's on the production side. But we are also investing in the transmission so that we are able to hook into regional interpower connectors in order to be able to link up to neighboring Kenya, Zambia as well, Malawi. And this is very critical if we are positioned to position Tanzania to be able to be the main hub of power transmission. And
Mr. Vice President, if I could just ask, I mean, Mission 300 was a huge event put together by the African Development Bank, the World Bank, as well as with strong support from Tanzania. What has happened since then? What are the major gains that you've seen since then in this regard, particularly with regards to the ambitious plans that you do have? What are the significant things that have happened since January?
Well, since January, it's not a very long time.
I know.
But one, we have been able to lock in financial support, again, to ensure that we deal with the critical constraints which would allow us to be able to sell power to our neighbors, but also in case in some regions where we have not yet finalized the transmission infrastructure, we are able to connect, for example, to Ethiopian power. So It's not a very long time.
I know, but just as with other excellencies on the platform, I know you're all moving at the speed of light, and we wish you good success with this. I've gotten a signal that we're coming to the end of this session, so I think, Marie-Angèle, you have one last question for His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Niger, and then we'll come to a more general question to close out.
Mr. Prime Minister, in fact, I have a question for you. You talked about the high five, and you talked about Niger, about their assets. You said you have sunlight throughout the year. So sometimes our strength can be transformed into weaknesses. We're talking about raw materials, but we don't have to wait for full self-sufficiency and be able to feed Nigerians. Let me talk about Niger Food in partnership with Group the Dangote Group. To what measures are you taking to ensure the success of this initiative, and how would this contribute to food security and economic progress in Niger? Food self-sufficiency in Niger. For about 20 months, we have an operation which is called Grande Irrigation. You have 8 regions in Niger, and each of them, the head of state have decided that they will deal with all the small water state. So it made it possible to come up with production, and this is the first time for 60 years that where we have not had any need to ask for assistance or to practice sales at lower prices, which means that initiative of the people of Niger is a reality in itself. The second important part about energy, Niger has made an effort to be part of the countries which will benefit from this M300 initiative. We are trying to use it as much as possible to reverse the trend. You know, before there was a power change in 2023, we were importing more than 70% of our energy products. At the point I'm talking, it's less than 30%, and when we are going to include the M300 initiative, we'll be able to cover all our needs. So this is a fundamental issue which will come and support agricultural production in Niger. Our ambition is not only that we should cover all our needs in 2-3 years, but we should be able to have a surplus that we can export. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Let me, before the last round, let me add something. You're talking about the African Development for the bank group. It supported and continued to support your countries. We are at a time when we are building the replenishment of the fund. I want to know how you are working with the country and what you can say to President Adesina showed the way. He ensured that the African continent, and in particular, it is a determination for all Pan-Africanists in how we mobilize resources domestically to be able to support what is doing a lot for our economies. The Niger decided to provide $1 million in that fund. 1 million, yeah. We'll do it and we hope that in a few years the African Development Fund would not need to be financed by non-African countries. We thank all those who are contributing now. We need their contribution. But let me look at the theme for this year, making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. When we talk about this youth, when we talk about the population, it is a very important asset, and we have everything that we need. All we need to do is reorganize and we ensure that we have good management and good leadership, and that we should have peace. We should be allowed to manage our resources ourselves, and we will not need unnecessary presence on our continent. Thank you.
Much appreciated. We're just coming to the close of this session in just a few moments, but I'd be very remiss if I didn't ask all of you, Your Excellencies, this last question, and I just want to give you probably about 2 minutes each to respond. This annual meetings in particular has a very special dimension, as it marks, one, the election of a new president, and it also marks the end of a 10-year term, a remarkable 10 years of leadership by the president of the bank, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, a decade that saw him launch the high fives. I remember at the time a lot of people thought, well, what's the high five? But the brilliance of what he did was to simplify and synthesize complexity and make it something that was much more easily manageable. He's been known to be called Africa's optimist in chief. He doesn't see an obstacle that he thinks is impossible to overcome. And as leaders, each one of you have dealt with him and worked with him and vice versa over the years. What's your take on Dr. Adesina as you look back over his stewardship of the bank over the last 10 years? Just 2 minutes each. Just share your perspectives with us in this regard. We'll start with President Assoumani first, and then we'll go on in that order. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies.
I'm going to be brief because you're not that aware. He's a brother, and during these 10 years, I came to power in 2016, but I did everything to assist him to ensure that the bank should be a reliable institution. So we did advocacy, did everything to ask them to, because the ADB has a financing mechanism which is more accessible. So I continue to congratulate him. All our wishes and prayers is that whoever is replacing him should be able to take over and do even better. If he is still there to direct the person, to assist the person. I wonder why Mr. Adesina should not be an advisor behind the scenes to his successor. You should be a discreet advisor, because the ADB is a source of pride to Africa, and what the bank is doing for Africa is more than all the other institutions. It's all in our interests that we should ensure that the bank has the financial and human means to be able to work for the benefit of Africa. Thank you.
President Mahama.
Let me call him Akin, because Akin and Grace have become quite close friends of Lordina and I, and so we are family friends. But I first noticed him when I was president, and President Goodluck Jonathan, my friend, was president of Nigeria. At the time, Akin was Minister of Agriculture, and he was transforming Nigeria's agriculture at a very accelerated pace. He had come out with digital solutions for distributing subsidies, fertilizers, and all that. And it was something Ghana was grappling with, and so I took a special interest in what he was doing to try and copy what he was doing in Ghana. And so in 2016, when the election for AFDB came up, and he was the candidate, I became his chief campaigner. Something happened at the time. President Goodluck Jonathan had nominated him, and Ghana was strongly supporting him. And then government changed in Nigeria. And sometimes when government changes, in our part of the world sometimes, oh, this guy was part of the last government, so we don't support him. So I became his chief advocate to convince President Buhari that his choice was not that of Nigeria, it was a choice of all of us. And the rest is history. He won. And everybody can see that we made the right decision. I don't regret that we supported him strongly. And I think because of the background he had in agriculture, in many of our countries, some of the poorest people are farmers. And considering that he worked with farmers, he understood what poverty was all about. He understood that farmers needed power to irrigate their crops and so on and so forth. So he came to the bank with quite a lot of experience. And there's one thing I thank God for. His father sent him abroad to study medicine, and he decided to study agriculture. And Adesina is who he is because of his understanding of agriculture and how it is important for countries to feed themselves. So in all the documentaries that I saw, for me, the most important thing was moving that number of families out of hunger and increasing Africa's food production by 44 million tons. That's significant. And so we are happy with the work he's done. He's introduced the special agri processing zones, which we're about to start in Ghana. And the first thing any leader, any president owes his people is to make sure that you put food on the table and that they have enough food to eat. He set a very high standard. The bar is very high. And I'm hoping that whoever succeeds him will not only be able to attain the bar that he has set, but be able to push it beyond. And so thank you very much, Akin.
Thank you very much, President Mahama. Next, Vice President Mpango.
Well, when my brother, Dr. Adesina, came into office, Tanzania was getting support from ADB to the tune of $1.6 billion. Currently, it has soared up to $3.54 billion. So thank you very much. Everywhere we go in Tanzania, we can literally name several projects by his name. I have come to understand that in Yoruba, Akinwumi is someone who spreads joy and happiness. And therefore, I really want to commend the Yoruba people because they were spot on in choosing his name. Because the names not only have a meaning, they actually shape a person. So I really want to say without prejudice, Adesina, that I have known since I was Minister of Finance and Governor of the AFDB board, is a true African son of the soil, very devoted to a bright Africa, where the sun of prosperity shines 24/7. We thank you very much for what you have done for the continent. We wish you and your family a prosperous life. I think you are too young to retire, and I hope Africa will continue to use you and depend on you. And finally, I just want to reveal that consultations are underway back in Tanzania so that we name one of the prominent roads in Dar es Salaam or Zanzibar or Dodoma in your name in appreciation of the immense contribution to the development of Tanzania for the past 10 years. We wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vice President Mpango, and congratulations, Dr. Adesina. Your Yoruba translation is actually perfect, Mr. Vice President. Akinwumi is certainly somebody who spreads joy around. But in addition to that, the word Akin means warrior. And one of the things that I believe has typified the life of Dr. Adesina is that for all of his career, he's been a warrior against poverty and injustice. So to that, we say a big amen to
to your wishes. We'll come last, but certainly not the least, to Prime Minister Lamine.
Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Your Excellency, it's not the Prime Minister who will be talking, he's a former staff member. Permit me to talk as a former staff member. President Adesina met me here in Abidjan. We finalized the return of the African Development Bank from its temporary office in Tunis to the head office here. The person, Mr. Kabiriko, that he succeeded, that I would like to recognize. I was sent to Gabon soon after, and we needed to provide budget support to Gabon. At the board, many members were not for it. Mr. Adesina did the honor of calling on me, and he said, why are you defending the assistance of 500 million to Gabon? I told him that in its budgetary provisions, that country had put aside over $100 a barrel, and it had fallen that year to $29. So he said, I've understood everything, and he hung up, and he is the one who defended that budgetary support in Gabon. That's the first thing I remember about him. He sent me to Chad subsequently, where after a number of challenges, he asked me to act. President Deby called him to say, I thought that the person who you sent to act should remain here. He said, well and good, but he has a mission. First of all, he should follow up the completion of the bridge on Logon, and that the major infrastructure project of connection between Cameroon and Chad should be completed. Though that's a project that was supposed to produce energy, transport it, and distribute it. And there was also the issue of the budgetary assistance to Chad, and half of the members of the board were against it, saying that Chad had spent all its money on weapons. President Adesina called me. He said, explain to me, why should we support the budget? And I just simply told him that that country used over $1 billion to ensure its security, to ensure the security of the bordering corridors, Nigeria, Niger, and even Mali, Cameroon. And he said, I've understood you very well. He dropped the phone and he defended that these are things that cannot be forgotten. And today I was very pleased to note that a few weeks ago that bridge became a reality. He is the one who initiated it, and before he left, he inaugurated it. That's a bridge between two countries. It took hours and days to cross it, but today, in a few minutes, you are through. Thank you, Mr. President. I wish you all the best, and I think that I can tell you that you will certainly not have time to sleep.
Brings us almost to the close of our session, but we just want to say a very big thank you to Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, to his staff, to management, to the board, and to the Board of Governors for the excellent work done over the last 10 years. Truly transformative. We wish you all the very best, and again we say congratulations. For our panelists here today, His Excellency Azali Assoumani, President and Chief Marketing Officer of the Union of Comoros, His Excellency Mr. John Mahama, President and CEO of the Republic of Ghana, His Excellency Dr. Philip Isidore Mpango, Vice President, United Republic of Tanzania, ably representing Her Excellency Mrs. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and a transformative one for that matter, and His Excellency Ali Mahaman Lamine, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Niger. Your Excellencies, we're truly grateful. We want to sincerely say a very big thank you for gracing this platform with your presence,
providing ideas, and again, putting wind behind the sails of the African Development Bank. Before we close, I just want to say very quickly, there's a very important event taking place at 6:30 this evening. It's one of the marquee events of the bank, the financial presentation at 6:30 and the launch of the African Development Effectiveness Report, ADER, which will take place in the Salle des Fêtes Hall this evening. I believe it's going to be a packed event. It's extremely important. We look forward to seeing you. Once again, before we close, graciously, kindly give a very warm thanks to our distinguished excellencies for a wonderful session. Once again, we say a very big thank you. Excellence.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back to Newsday. We'll now take you to Abidjan for the launch of the 2025 African Economic Outlook Report. Please stay with us.
Next slide, you are going to see that this performance that we are talking about is varied across countries and across different regional groupings in Africa, by geographic regions, but also by country groupings in terms of the structure of their economies, with Eastern Africa once again taking the lead amongst its peers because of significant diversification of their economies. The economy in the Eastern Africa region is estimated to grow by almost 6% by 2026, which is heading towards that 7 percentage point to have meaningful impacts on poverty reduction and job creation for youths in Africa. And all the other regions of the continent are also doing well, albeit gradually. East Africa is followed by West Africa, then we have North Africa, Central Africa, and Southern Africa. And even Southern Africa that we have recurrently reported as having challenges because of structural issues in South Africa is now beginning to grow, despite the challenges we have seen with regard to the trade uncertainties and the trade tariffs. If you look at the economic groupings across the continent, then you find that non-resource intensive countries continue to maintain more than 5 percentage point growth since COVID-19. And you might remember that even during COVID, this was the economies in Africa that did not actually see significant recession. So again, something going on with how we relate with natural resources, which is one of the part of the themes of this event, of these meetings on making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. But the significant challenges in our macroeconomic fundamentals continue to remain, but even there, we see a mixed picture. Several countries have recorded significant progress, and on average, inflation, which reached 18.7% in 2024, is now heading downwards. So we predict 13.7%, 13.8% in 2025, and going down to below the double digits in terms of getting inflation down to 0.9% in 2026. And when you look at exchange rate dynamics, you find exactly the same issues, where we see that despite the challenges of exchange rate hiking and currency depreciation in 2024, in 2025 and 2026, we expect 21 African countries to see depreciation continuing, albeit more gradually, but appreciation in economies, in currencies for about 25 African countries as well. So again, even in the macroeconomic dynamics in Africa, we are seeing some significant changes. But again, inflation over the long run. And this next point we have there is that external service for debt is crowding out fiscal resources from the usual governance of countries to deliver on education, to deliver on health, and deliver on all those. That black line there is the rapid rise in the cost of debt, which is because of the changing structure of debt, but also the risk perceptions that we have always talked about in Africa's debt composition. Now, when you look at this slide, we have seen this before in 2024. On the left side there, we see what we call the paradox in Africa's cost of debt, because Africa has been demonstrably seen as the least defaulting in long-term infrastructure financed projects over a long time of period that Moody's Analytics have tried to look into, at 1.9% default rate compared to 12.4% in East Asia. And even in developed countries, we have 6.6% in North America and 4.6% in Asia. But Africa still pays higher premiums for accessing capital. And again, this is not unique to Africa, because when you dig deeper, you'll find out what is driving it is poverty. And on the right side of that slide, you see a perfect correlation between sovereign ratings by Moody's Analytics and GDP per capita growth, which means that the less your GDP per capita, the higher the risk of being downgraded by Moody's and the big three. And the more your ratings gets poorer, the higher the cost of capital. So again, that's a challenge that we need to continue to watch. And that is why in one of our recommendations, we are pushing very strongly for the reform of how risk ratings are done, because if we can't continue to discredit the poorer countries where the returns, the risk-adjusted margins for investments is proven to be much higher for the world and for all the investors themselves. But amidst that, we are seeing a more worrying challenge that concessional financing and access to grants that helps many African countries to be able to do development is dwindling. Despite the rebound in external financial flows we saw in 2023 because of portfolio flows that went from negative to positive, even in 2023, we already saw that FDI declined by 3.4%, ODA by 3%, and diaspora remittances by 6.2%. So, and recent announcements we are seeing from major ODA providing countries is projected to take away about $4.2 billion in US dollars for aid for growth in development in Africa. So again, many people argue that the age of aid is over, the age of cheap money is over, and that is why the African Development Bank Group focused on this theme of making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. The time has come for the continent to look inwards and harness the rich assets that we have that has not been put to effective use. And on this particular slide, you can imagine we are paying more to access finance. We don't have enough in terms of fiscal capital, but if you look at fiscal financial flows out of the continent every year, we are losing more than 3 times the resources that Africa gets in terms of financial outflows. Here, just because of poor risk ratings that I've talked about, we lose about $74 billion US dollars. Illicit financial flows, the continent loses about $90 billion US dollars. Corruption costs the continent $148 billion US dollars. And international profit shifting, base erosion and profit shifting is costing Africa about $275 billion US dollars. When you sum only that up, we have $587 billion US dollars leaving the shores of this continent every year. That is about 1.6 billion daily. But the continent had every form of international external flows into the continent. As at 2022, it was about around 190 billion. So if you do the math, Africa is actually a net creditor to the world. And it only takes better governance, rule of law, greater efficiency and accountability to hold these resources within the continent and channel it to better use. And the agency to do that lies within the continent. And then even for the resources that we borrow from loans and other things to do infrastructure, Africa has a 39% infrastructure financing gap, inefficiency gap, which simply means that we mobilize if we mobilize 100 billion for infrastructure in every year, 39 billion is gone due to inefficiency. And actually, looking at the actual figures of infrastructure financing in Africa, our estimates is that finance inefficiency in financing infrastructure on project selection, project preparation, portfolio management, procurement, and other things costs Africa about $106 billion every year. Again, the agency to hold this capital, to retain this capital on the continent and use it for development is within our reach. The IT people, this is not working very well. Can you please make sure it works? Then, if you look at all this, we can think about the potential downside risks that is within Africa's macroeconomic sphere. Persistent inflation is still ongoing, it's going down, the direction of travel is good, but we are not yet, it's not uhuru yet. Now we have high interest rate and the cost of capital, as I've talked about, debt servicing, debt refinancing remain a recurrent challenge for the continent. And then commodity dependence and price volatility in the commodity markets is another challenge that has continued to be a problem for the continent. And then needless to talk about climate shocks and the recent trade tariffs and policy uncertainties that we are seeing. All these are headwinds that policymakers need to continue to keep in mind as we move forward. And then leads us to the second chapter of the report, which is on how we can boost domestic capital mobilization and efficient use in Africa. How can we be able to mobilize domestic resources in order to be able to do development more on the continent? And here we took a pause to define capital in a more broader term, in the real sense of it, that capital is not just money. Capital includes human capital, Africa has a lot of it, natural capital, Africa has a lot of it, fiscal capital, financial capital, but also business capital. But if you look on the right side of that, how you combine all these forms of capital together leads to how you produce goods and services to grow your economies and improve the quality of lives for citizens in countries. So bringing all this together is what we call inclusive growth. But the challenge is our focused quite a lot on finance. Great inefficiencies because of fiscal profligacy in Africa and how we use fiscal resources. Great inefficiencies in how we use natural capital because of high discount rates that forces countries to sell commodities instead of add value to it. Great inefficiencies in how we use our human capital because of poor governance and rule of law on the continent that costs the Japa syndrome, if I speak the Nigerian language. That just means migration. So we have lots of Africa's capital migrating annually to contribute to development elsewhere for reasons that we in Africa can control. And then if you go forward, just keep this combining different types of assets that we have on the continent in your mind as we go through the presentation. So why are we not able to combine that effectively? State capacity and external factors is what we found drives low domestic capital mobilization, retention, and efficient use on the continent. You look at it from every lens, you see that government revenue in Africa is comparing very poorly to all the other regions at 19.8% of GDP. But the point I need to make is that African countries use 80%, basically 80% of total public expenditure in Africa is from this 19.8%. And that is why the scale of development is not yet being able to break the vicious cycles of poverty. But Africa is not as dependent as we always used to think. Because only 20% of Africa's public finances is coming from the external sources. Find that we have a lot of headroom in our revenue mobilization on the continent. But to give an olive branch, the hope we find is that when you look at the right figure there, you'll find that there are countries in Africa who already understand how to do this and are even exceeding their peers in other regions. Countries like Lesotho, South Africa, Morocco, and many other countries are performing at par with regard to revenue mobilization. And we also see that when you invest in revenue mobilization in Africa, you see rapid results. And that is what we have seen in Cote d'Ivoire, in different countries where the African Development Bank Group has invested in terms of helping in revenue mobilization on the continent. Several examples are there to show that it is possible. It's not rocket science. Then, second point here is that weak tax administration capacity in Africa is also leading to underperformance in tax collection on the continent. And you see on that right side of the graph, Africa is just about 14.8 as at 2023, 14.8% of GDP, compared to 32.9% in Europe and Central Asia. And even Africa itself has a tax capacity of about 20%. So we still have a lot of headroom to do better in collecting revenue without increasing tax rates on the continent. It's just about efficiency in administration of revenue collection. And you will see some recommendations on how to deal with that. On the right side is again to show that Africa is not one country, and several countries in Africa are doing very well with regard to tax collection as well, telling me that we have lessons, examples to learn from within the continent that to make it easy for us. So it, again, is not rocket science. Non-tax revenue collection in Africa is also the same. On average, we have about 5.3% of GDP in non-tax revenue collection in Africa, compared to a world average of about 7.1%. But if you look into the data, you will find that Europe and Central Asia is about 14.6%, and Africa is just at about 5%. Huge headroom to be able to do better. Again, on that graph on the left side, you find that some African countries provide case studies on how to do this better. What about business capital? Everybody talks about mobilizing the private sector. But again, I see a lot of private sector entrepreneurs and gurus in the sector in this room. But again, they will tell you, even though they are large on the continent, Africa's private sector in terms of scale still remains small. And if you look at the number of 1 billion plus companies in Africa, we have just about 345 compared to 1,500 in China. So we still have a long headroom in order to be able to deliver more in that area. But one other debilitating factor is that Africa still invests very little in research and development at 0.4% on average, compared to 2% and more in countries where they provide the ecosystem that allows for innovation and entrepreneurship to thrive. If you look on that right side there, you also see that we have huge informality on the continent. About 85% of businesses in Africa operate in the informal sector, most of it non-taxed. Why? There's reasons why informality is thriving on the continent because of the nature and type of private capital that is being mobilized on the continent. If we did well in bringing in this private sector, providing an ecosystem for SMEs to thrive on the continent, we can mobilize about 125 billion US dollars annually. These are much more than the resources that we focus a lot on to try and mobilize externally. There is money in Africa. It is about mobilizing and valorizing it. So in general, we find in our report that if we focused on simply improving efficiency, quality of institutions, transparency and accountability, macroeconomic policy governance, and all the recommendations that we always continue to talk about on the continent, this continent can mobilize 1.43 trillion US dollars every year without increasing tax rate. These are just headrooms that we have in existing policies and institutions that, avenues for mobilizing resources on the continent. And that is much more than we need to achieve the SDGs, which is 1.3 trillion. So if we go forward, when you get the report, you will see where each source of that 1.4 trillion is coming from. This is not rocket science. It's simply looking closer on what we have in order to use what we have to get what we want. And that led us, since we are finding out that institutions, quality, rule of law, transparency, accountability are the issues, is it just hearsay? Let's look at the correlations and the relationships on how quality of institutions, economic governance, and rule of law impacts on revenue mobilization in Africa, but also globally. If you look at the graph here, we'll find that the governance indicators, in terms of using Mo Ibrahim governance indicators in Africa, has been improving quite a lot, except in in issues around political instability and absence of violence. On all the other indicators, whether you look at the PEFA reports or the Mo Ibrahim reports, every report that is tracking the quality of institutions in the world, Africa has done well in the past 10 years, but we're not doing well enough when we compare ourselves with the rest of the world, which is the slide on the right side there. A lot of work needs to be done there. Why is this happening? So the key drivers and consequences of weak governance in Africa are huge. And if we understand where the rain starts beating us, then we can know when to get an umbrella. And this is why we looked at this, and you find that capacity constraints, capacity in mobilizing natural capital, in mobilizing domestic capital, fiscal capital, and all forms of capital is at the roots of the inefficiencies we have in institutions. When you don't have the money, you cannot set the systems to build the right institutions, to mobilize more resources, but also make the resources that you mobilized more efficient. But corruption has almost equal, if not more, impact than lack of financing in terms of the nature and quality of our institutions. Corruption in public service delivery, corruption in the public sector, but also corruption in how external parties relate with Africa. But other issues there is political instability and political interference in governance systems. That's independence or non-independence of different units of government, high levels of informality we've talked about, historical legacies and part dependencies where we're not negotiating the right contracts because of history and historical legacies. Some call it colonial history. Then also weak leadership in terms of who simply is leading the organization or leading the country. And all these lead to state capture. And because of state capture, we have lack of public trust among citizens, so they don't pay taxes. We have low tax and non-tax revenue because of poor, weak administration capacity, and we have fiscal profligacy and poor public financial management. We have high risk perception and cost of capital, not because of perception alone, but also because of real challenges in the governance and stability of economies, but we also have base erosion and profit shifting by international and corporate organizations, abuse of power and illicit financial flows, and corruption. You notice that corruption is on both sides because it drives weak institutions and it creates weak institutions. Now, if you try to go deeper in terms of efficiency in tax mobilization, you will find, again, please, can you put back this slide? So you will find that governance quality has very direct implication on efficiency of resource mobilization, whether it's domestic or external. So when we talk about dwindling aid, dwindling FDI, dwindling remittances and portfolio flows, governance quality of countries we see is very directly related with it. The better governance you create, the more capital flows to your country. Transparency, accountability, control of corruption, property rights, and rules-based governance also have very direct implications on domestic and foreign revenue mobilization, especially in tax and non-tax collection. And because of this, it is only simply because when you have all these qualities, you create market stability, political stability that allows countries to, investors to believe in you and invest in your countries. So governance quality and tax revenue are very highly correlated. So if you improve effectiveness and the quality of controlling corruption, you increase tax revenue. If you also, but one thing we find as countries that have natural resource rents will have an inverse relationship with tax revenue. So more natural resource and focus on natural resource rents is actually a challenge for many African countries. So put together, state capacity, state capture is at the roots of poor mobilization and utilization of resources in Africa, because it creates the elites will now negotiate preferential laws and regulations, tax exemptions, privileges, and so on. This is what I call the neocolonialism effect. Then we have monopolistic and oligopolistic competition emerging that creates weak property rights and high political risks, and that crowds out SMEs, and they all go informal because they don't trust what is going on in the government. And then corruption, tax evasion, all these things is just a vicious cycle. And these are things that can be handled from within the continent. It's just the political will to try and do that. Please change the slide. This is not working. Can you be changing it from there? So we go to policy recommendations. Next, please. On policy recommendations, we find that for the short and medium term, macroeconomic policy management remains key. How do we coordinate fiscal and monetary policy in the continent? Fiscal prudence, governance, and institutional reforms remain key, and also preemptive debt restructuring and decoupling our mindsets from aid and debt from consumption to focus on debt productivity is a key aspect. But in the medium term, we need to deepen regional economic integration and trade. We also need to leverage the ACFTA. We already have the instrument. We need to implement local content and franchising policies to allow us to add more value to our resources, but also preferred procurement to create domestic demand in the continent, and also strategic partnerships that can mobilize development finance from our partners. Next, please. And domestic revenue mobilization and retention remains a major issue we need to focus on, and different aspects. If you go back on tax revenue, we have a clear toolbox of what countries need to do in order to mobilize more tax revenue, but also leverage the resources within the continent. On efficiency in productivity for natural and human capital, there are several things that we need to do, but focusing on natural capital accounting and upgrading our systems of national accounts alone can hugely increase GDP growth on the continent. We already released a report on this, but also we need natural resource ownership. Quite a lot of times we talk about resource potentials on the continent, but who owns those resources? Have we signed them away to foreign firms? And, I don't need to go too much into that. But we need also to improve transparency and accountability in how we use our natural resources to become more accountable to citizens. On human capital, we need to scale up appropriate education, and our emphasis is on appropriate education that feeds into the needs of the businesses in those countries, the needs of government and productivity on the continent. But we need to focus a lot more on leveraging the diaspora. If I just spend 1 minute on this. Africa's diaspora rose from about 19 million in 1990 to 48 million in 2024. And we have seen that consistently, remittances is the most steady and counter-cyclical source of resources for many African countries. Estimated to rise to 283 billion by 2030. And if we have clear and well-crafted policies, it can immediately rise to 500 billion today. So how we relate with our diasporans is very critical in terms of how we are going to be able to move this forward. We need to deepen integration and strengthen financial institutions on the continent. On regional integration and economic integration, I won't talk so much about it because we have discussed that in last year. But we have the ACFTA, we have several instruments that we need to continue to leverage more and more in order to deepen integration on the continent. But we can't have integration when Africans can't move from one country to the other. We can't have integration when the cost of travel between the continent, you would prefer to go to London or go to the US. So we need to continue to invest in the high-five sectors, in transport and regional corridors and so on and so forth. You get the report, you will see the details on key growth drivers on regional integration we need to invest in. But we also need to strengthen Africa's development finance institutions. You have already seen, if you're borrowing from the African Development Bank Group, you pay 500% less than if you are borrowing from the capital market. So it's not rocket science. A bigger African Development Bank Group, a bigger African Development Fund, a bigger Africa 50, and many of our African institutions will deliver more development to the continent. But we also need to establish the missing ones, like the Africa Financial Stability Mechanism or the Africa Monetary Institute, to help support the continent on debt refinancing, but also on price stability across the continent. Because when you look into the countries of the continent, a lot of these are already happening in some countries. It's just for us to learn from each other and scale it up. And that can happen. So next slide. And here is my final slide on what actually is like what the president calls changing the Intel inside, the software that drives all these things we are talking about. And that software change needs to happen in Africa, African leaders and African citizens, but also in African development partners. For African leaders and African citizens, we need to strengthen African unity. True African unity, where an African and factors of production can flow freely from one country to the other. We need to make sure that we have a stronger African Union that is able to bring political stability and one voice for Africa on global issues. We need to implement the ACFTA. We need also to drive Africa's sovereignty in natural resources, in economic sovereignty and other things. But above all, we also need to create demand for Africa's products by Africans in Africa. We can't expect SMEs to grow if our taste is to buy, what do they call it, toothpick from China. If you don't buy African products, there is no way, it's not rocket science. African entrepreneurs will not thrive. But for the development partners, we need, again, the reform in mindset. That reform in mindset, changing the Intel inside, is about the global financial architecture. We dwelt on it last year. The global financial architecture we have today does not deliver capital to where capital is needed most, by African and developing countries, but also by investors in the developed countries. If resources are not going to where you have greater risk-adjusted rates of return, what kind of economics are we doing? So for both developed and developing countries, reforming the global financial architecture is very necessary on risk perception, on global taxation that allows that 275 billion to leave the shores of poor countries in Africa. We need climate finance that is simplified enough to ensure that climate financing flows to climate vulnerable countries. Please read our AEO. We can't achieve our global climate goals if we continue that way. Base erosion and profit shifting needs to stop, but we also need to continue to provide concessional financing, because we see that only that can actually drive development for a longer term. I hear a lot of conversation of private sector coming to the rescue. Private sector does not come to do development. I'm sorry. Private sector comes for profit. And when private sector comes for profit, interest rates will continue to go higher, and African countries will remain locked in a debt conundrum. So we can't replace public resources with private resources in development. Both are important, but public resources should be used to leverage private sector more, using de-risking instruments and several innovations that the African Development Bank and others have been leading. But we also need to move from an extractives for export agenda to a win-win agenda that delivers growth in countries that are natural resources rich, high profits to investors that come to invest in those resources, but also reduces the global carbon footprint of trade. What we have now of mining resources from Congo and taking it to China or US or anywhere else to produce is 3 times more in terms of the cost of production. But it also has huge carbon footprint in those products that we are going to produce and then send back to sell to Congo and many African countries. So achieving inclusive growth that drives global sustainability, reduces climate change, but delivers on what we all care about, poverty reduction, jobs for youths and women, and other things, is possible, but we need to change the intel inside. We need to work together to have a good handshake of equal and productive partnerships with the continent. I don't believe that aid leads to growth, but I don't believe that aid is not necessary for growth. It is. But it is how it is delivered and how it is utilized. So we need to work on cost of capital. This is central, because the cost of even climate finance is crowding out fiscal sustainability on the continent. Countries borrow to do climate adaptation, and the cost of refinancing those debts crowds out investments in health, investments in education, investment in resilient infrastructure, and so on. We need to collectively work together to change the intel inside. Transparency and accountability is a buzzword in all these discussions. On debt, I sit in many discussions, it's about debtor transparency. What about creditor transparency? We need transparency on both sides if we are actually going to be able to drive better efficiency in how we move resources forward. Like base erosion and profit shifting, that is the largest leakage of resources on the continent. It can't happen from one side. We need cross-border capital flows that is more affordable, cheaper, and more transparent on both sides as well. But we also need global peace and security. We cannot continue fighting wars and expect development to happen. There cannot be development without peace. And when you look at African countries that have high resources and are not delivering on development, there is one form of conflict or other going on in those countries. Why is that the case? We need to continue to work together to make this happen, and it is possible. Let's work together to make Africa's capital work for Africa's development. It is good for Africa, and it is good for investors that invest in Africa. Thank you very much.
insightful and very rich presentation. I will not try to summarize it all because it was indeed very rich and comprehensive, but maybe a few key points. Since we are living in a challenging context, it is critical that we implement sound and tailored macroeconomic policies in our countries. You've also mentioned the importance of better governance, accountability, and rule of law if we want to make Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. And an issue very close to my heart, you've mentioned harnessing diaspora for productive investment. Thank you very much. So now I would like to play the video because we're supposed to start with that, and we had an IT issue. Please, can we play the opening video now?
With all the minerals we have, oil, gas, metals, forest resources, carbon resources, and everything that we have, it's indefensible that Africa is poor.
The global economic landscape is changing. With global uncertainties, shifting aid priorities, and geopolitical tensions, the continent stands at a crossroads. Africa has what it takes to finance its own development agenda, using our own capital. Not by loans, not through aid, but with domestic resources. Africa currently finances 80% of its development locally. Now, what if the continent allocated its resources more effectively? It's time. Together, let's use homegrown resources combined with homegrown solutions to create the Africa we want. Welcome
to the launch of the bank's 2025 African Economic Outlook Report on making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development, which is also the theme of the bank's 2025 annual meeting.
Thank you very much. Yes, a warm round of applause. Thank you. And now I would like to call our Senior Vice President, Mrs. Marie-Laure Akin-Olupade, Senior Vice President of the African Development Bank Group, to deliver the opening remarks on behalf of President Adesina.
Merci beaucoup, Linguère. And good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of President Adesina, my role was to welcome you, but I see that you are all comfortably seated, and I hope duly challenged by the very insightful presentation by Professor Orama. And like you, I agree, nothing of this is rocket science. So let me go back to my script. Good afternoon, everyone. The African Economic Outlook Report is our opportunity to analyze and project economic growth trends for Africa, to assess the pace of structural transformation of countries, and to evaluate the effects of global dynamics on African economies. The African Economic Outlook Report 2025, you have seen it, shows that 21 African countries are projected to achieve real GDP growth rates of above 5%. And this is despite the challenging global context. And Africa accounts for 13 of the 20 fastest growing economies in the world. Clearly, better macroeconomic policies and stabilization efforts are really showing good results, and they are showing up the resilience of the countries, of the economies. And in the face of global dynamics of tariff, the debt, and the decline in official development assistance, it is absolutely imperative and urgent, more than ever, that Africa focuses more on domestic mobilization of resources. And this is why, as you have heard, the theme for the African Economic Outlook for 2025 is making Africa's capital work better for Africa's development. The report, you've seen it, and you will read it. Report lays out a raft of areas for expanding the mobilization of capital in Africa. And let me just cite a few of those. Transitioning African businesses from the informal sector to the formal sector by simply simplifying business registration procedures and tax filing processes as well, we've seen it can generate $125 billion in new revenues annually. Similarly, securitizing remittances through diaspora bonds can equally mobilize about $30 billion annually. Improving the overall governance holds one of the best ways to generate revenue. Indeed, ending illicit capital flows will generate approximately $90 billion annually, and ending profit shifting by multinational corporations will add $275 billion annually in revenues and let Africa stop being a net exporter of capital, as Professor Urama told us. So ending corruption will add about $148 billion annually, and this represents 25% of Africa's GDP. This is huge. This is simply huge. And the proper valuation and inclusion of Africa's natural capital in the estimation of its GDP will expand the valuation of the economies, and it will add billions of dollars to the economies. For example, Africa's nominal GDP could have been $66 billion higher just from the carbon sequestration in 2022, and this is a potential output expansion of about 2%. But we live in very uncertain times, and the world has been shaken with the US tariff and the emerging tariff wars. And yes, it's probably muted temporarily, but we are still in the midst of very high uncertainties and shocks to the global economy. And in Africa, 47 out of 54 countries have been impacted by the US tariff. And the new 50% US tariff on the European Union will further exacerbate these trade uncertainties with very significant heightened downside risk to the global economies and to the African economies, the countries. And this trade policy shift will also have other effects, including, of course, a decline in concessional financing and official development assistance. Africa must diversify its export markets to reduce its vulnerabilities. African countries must therefore strengthen their capacities to negotiate on the emerging strong interest for its vast natural resources, especially critical minerals. Africa's interests must come first, and the newly refocused African Natural Resource and Investment Center of the African Development Bank and our African Legal Support Facility, as well as the African Mineral Development Center at the African Union Commission, will play critical roles in supporting Africa to raise more capital from its vast natural resources. In closing, let me say, on behalf of President Adesina, that in today's world, the only reliable ally you have is yourself. So Africa must look inwards must unlock and mobilize domestic resources to reduce vulnerability and grow its economies with pride. The policy
taking place in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, where the African Development Bank Group has unveiled its annual Development Effectiveness Report 2025, entitled Sustaining Resilience and Driving Transformation in Africa, during its 2025 annual meetings in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire.